LoveLore Library. Chapter 556. The door to the room opened. Mo Jingqi and Mo Jingli entered together. Within the room, the screen separating the inner and outer rooms had already been removed. As soon as the two entered, they saw Mo Xiaoyao half reclining on the bed. His white hair was casually scattered on the bed, and his white robes made him appear particularly cold and distant. Yili sat on the edge of the bed, casually putting down the apple she had just peeled. Nodding her head, she smiled and said, "Emperor Chu, Prince of Li, please sit." The two silently sat down. The imperial bodyguards were standing guard outside, and Yili was being held back by Mo Xiaoyao. Naturally, they could not expect anyone to serve them tea. Fortunately, the two were not here to drink tea. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the two, asking, "What business do you have with I at this time?" Such a casual tone was nothing in Mo Jingli's ears. However, in Mo Jingqi's ears, it was completely different. When Mo Xiaoyao was still in the Chu capital, he would never have used such a casual and perfunctory tone to speak to him. Even if the politeness and submission in his tone were fake, he would at least put on an act. However, right now, Mo Xiaoyao's tone was as if the person in front of him was not the monarch of a country, but a random cat or dog. If he was happy, he would say a few words, and if he was unhappy, he would ignore him. Seeing that Mo Jingqi was about to fly into a rage, Mo Jingli inadvertently coughed lightly and asked, "Imperial brother, don't you have something to ask Prince Ding?" Although he also found Mo Xiaoyao displeasing to the eye, it had to be said that seeing his imperial brother's face darken with anger, Mo Jingqi felt rather happy. Mo Jingqi took a deep breath, suppressing the anger in his heart. Staring at Mo Xiaoyao, he asked, "Where did Princess Changel go?" Mo Xiaoyao looked doubtfully at Mo Jingqi. Only after quite a while did he lightly scoff. Indifferently, he asked, "Princess Changel is your daughter. How would I know where she went?" Mo Jingqi sneered, "Changel went missing in the Nanzhao Palace. Who else could it be but you?" Mo Xiaoyao's lips curled up, his tone mocking. "That's right. Princess Changel went missing from the Nanzhao Palace. How would I know why she went to the Nanzhao Palace? How would I know when she went to the Nanzhao Palace? Mo Jingqi, your daughter is missing and you come to ask me for her. Are you going to ask I for her one day when your dragon throne is gone?" You. Mo Jingqi's complexion alternated between green and white. Finally, unable to restrain himself, he slapped the table and stood up, glaring angrily at Mo Xiaoyao. How could Mo Xiaoyao take Mo Jingqi's anger seriously? Lying back on the soft pillow, he gazed impatiently at Yili. "Li, I'm hungry." Yili helplessly picked up an apple from the side, cutting it into small pieces and feeding it to him. Mo Xiaoyao ate happily, not forgetting to share with Yili. "Li, eat too. The food that Leitingfeng sent over is not bad." Seeing the two people before him acting as if there was no one else present, Mo Jingqi was so angry that his hair stood on end, but there was nothing he could do. He could only leave in a huff. Seeing that he was about to leave, Mo Xiaoyao gave him a look and said, "Wait." Mo Jingqi gritted his teeth and said, "What else do you want to say?" Mo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. After thinking for a bit, he said, "It's rare for you to specially visit I, so I'll tell you a piece of good news for free. Speaking of which, the Rengongzi that you met a few days ago is the current commander of the northern region, the orphan of the previous dynasty, Lin Yuan." This news immediately made Mo Jingqi dizzy, unable to recover for a long time. Mo Jingli frowned and said, "If Ren Qining is Lin Yuan, then who is Tan Jiji?" Mo Xiaoyao shrugged, indicating that he didn't know. Mo Jingqi laughed coldly and said, "You think I'll believe your nonsense?" Although he said this, Mo Jingqi's heart was faintly shaken. This was because he knew that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't use this kind of thing to tease him. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's slightly mocking expression, Mo Jingqi hated that he couldn't find a hole to hide in. The Tan Jiji that he trusted was a remnant of the previous dynasty, and the Ren Qining that he had just saved 2 days ago was also a remnant of the previous dynasty. If this spread out, where would he put his face as the emperor? He couldn't be bothered to argue with Mo Xiaoyao anymore. Mo Jingqi's face darkened as he flicked his sleeves and left. Mo Jingli was a step slower than him, walking behind him. He hesitantly turned around to look at Mo Xiaoyao and asked, "Ren Qining really?" Mo Xiaoyao laughed disdainfully and said, "I don't have candy to eat if I lie to you." Mo Jingqi, that trash, didn't hear anything when someone else was tampering with the land of the Dechu state. In these few years, Ren Qining has taken over the entire northern region, and his hands have already reached the Dechu state. What is that trash doing? This is also good, lest one day I can't stand it anymore and destroy him first. You tell Mo Jingqi that when he becomes the emperor of 10,000 countries, I will send him a sword on behalf of Emperor Taizu to help him die for his country. Mo Jingli was speechless. He turned around and walked out. Outside the door, Mo Jingqi clearly heard Mo Xiaoyao's words. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling, but he couldn't turn around and confront Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Jingli's eyes darkened. He stepped forward and said, "Imperial brother, we should return to the capital." Mo Jingqi coldly snorted, flicked his sleeves and left. Mo Xiaoyao recuperated for nearly half a month before leaving in city with Yi Li. As for the capable young master Qing Qin, he had already returned early. Before leaving, Ling Taihan also brought his 2 sworn sisters and sworn brother to say goodbye. After Pavilion Master Ling fought with Mo Xiaoyao and Murong Xiong twice in a row, he seemed to have realized something and decided to go back and practice in seclusion. And city, which was originally bustling with noise and excitement, had already gradually quieted down. When Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao left, only Lei Tingfeng came to see them off. He still had to stay in city to clean up the mess left behind by the Murong clan's destruction. In comparison, although the Prince Ding mansion didn't achieve its goal, it was the most profitable. Because they didn't have to pay anything, all they got was net profit. They didn't even have to clean up the mess. The 2 of them traveled slowly. By the time they returned to the northwest, it was already the end of September, close to October. Just as they returned to Glass City, they hadn't even entered the Grand Prince Ding mansion when a white and tender little bun wearing an ink-colored brocade rushed out guiltily. Mo Xiaobao hugged Yi Li and cried earth-shatteringly, "Woo woo, woo wah. Mother, your words don't count. Woo woo, you clearly said that you would come to see Xiaobao the next day. Woo wah. Mother doesn't want Xiaobao anymore. Xiaobao is a child that no one wants. Woo woo." Yi Li couldn't help but frown. Who taught this child all these messy things? But looking at the tearful little bun, even Xiaobao, who usually hated being called the most, came out. It could be seen that he was really sad. Ever since Mo Xiaobao was born, she had always kept him by her side. This was the first time she left for such a long time. Seeing her son crying to the point of hiccups, Yi Li hurriedly lowered her head and kissed his teary little face. She said softly, "I'm sorry, mother was wrong. How can mother not want Xiaobao? Xiaobao is mother's precious darling." Being kissed by mother in front of so many people, Mo Xiaobao still felt a little embarrassed. His little face immediately turned red like an apple. But he really missed mother. In the end, Mo Xiaobao, who couldn't bear to leave mother, buried his little face in mother's shoulder. His 2 little hands tightly hugged Yi Li's neck, unwilling to let go. "Mother, Xiaobao misses mother." Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaobao's white and tender face, his big watery eyes, her heart softened like a ball of cotton. Mother also misses Xiaobao. Then mother won't not want Xiaobao anymore. Mo Xiaobao looked at Yili with eager eyes. Yili suddenly had no resistance. Mother will never not want Xiaobao. Mother is the best, Xiaobao loves mother. Smack, Mo Xiaobao cheerfully gave Yili a few longing kisses. The people who came to receive them saw their little Shitzi and Wangfei talking about their longing after a long separation. At the same time, they saw their prince standing at the side with a dark face. After a while, Mo Xiaobao was still grabbing his mother to talk about his longing and grievances. Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He bent down and lifted Mo Xiaobao from Yili's arms. Mother. Being lifted by the collar by Mo Xiaoyao, Mo Xiaobao kicked his little legs in displeasure as he begged mother for help. Xiaoyao. Yili looked disapprovingly at Mo Xiaoyao. It wasn't good to always lift a child by the collar. What if Xiaobao was hurt? Mo Xiaoyao quickly changed the way he carried Mo Xiaobao that Yili could accept. He held Mo Xiaobao in his arms and looked with a smile at his son whose eyes were darting around as he said, Son, Fuwang also misses you very much. Do you not miss Fuwang at all when you see me? Mo Xiaobao bared his teeth at him at a place where Yili couldn't see. He didn't want to hate Fuwang. It was good if Fuwang didn't come back often. Then no one would steal mother from him. But in front of Yili, Mo Xiaobao could only obediently nod his head and say, This child also misses Fuwang. Bending down, he kissed Mo Xiaoyao's face. Mo Xiaoyao, whose face was covered in saliva, was stunned. Then looking at the little thing in his arms with a mischievous smile, Mo Xiaoyao resisted the urge to throw the little thing out. He put on a fake smile and said, You really are Fuwang's good son. Xiaobao is so obedient. Xiaobao must have finished the homework that Fuwang gave you before you left, right? Mo Xiaobao's face stiffened. His eyes kept darting around, not daring to look at Mo Xiaoyao. Looking at his expression, how could Mo Xiaoyao not understand? He looked at him with an amiable smile. Xiaobao, it seems like you need to explain to Fuwang how much you missed your Fuwang these past few months, to the point that you forgot to do your homework. Mo Xiaobao was like a punctured balloon, slowly deflating. Fuwang and whatnot, he hated it the most. Chapter 557. Returning to the Fu, Yili didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she held the pitiful little bun and pleaded with Mo Xiaoyao for him. Although Mo Xiaobao missed his mother very much, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't do anything but think about her day and night. In fact, after Mo Xiaobao left Mo Xiaoyao's oppression and Mr. Qingyun doted on this great-grandson of his, it was completely different from how he was strict with Su Qingqin and the other brothers. As a result, Mo Xiaobao was so pleased with himself that he was like a wild horse that was out of control. So much so that he forgot about the homework that Mo Xiaoyao had assigned to him last night before he left and said that he would check when he came back. This time, Mo Xiaoyao didn't purposely make things difficult for Mo Xiaobao and gave him homework that he could complete. But the bad thing was that Mo Xiaobao was too smart. Smart people tend to be more scheming than others. So he procrastinated, and when he found out that his father was about to return, he didn't even finish a third of his homework. Alright, split it into 10 days and make up for the homework that your father gave you, understand? Yili reached out and rubbed the child's small head as she said softly. In reality, Mo Xiaobao was so young that Yili didn't feel that giving him too much homework was a good thing. But since it was given, it must be completed. She couldn't let the child develop the mentality of slacking and getting lucky. Mo Xiaobao knew that he was in the wrong and carefully raised his eyelids to look at Yili. In a soft voice, he said, Mother, this child knows his mistake. Yili nodded with a smile. If you know your mistake and can change, then you're a good child. Then can this child go a few days later to accompany Taigong? Mo Xiaobao said shyly. Yili couldn't help but smile. "Alright, we'll go see Taigong tomorrow and then tell Taigong that we'll go to the academy in a few days. But you can't be like this in the future. If you study with Taigong, you have to understand the principle of perseverance. You can't neglect your studies because of other things, understand?" Mo Xiaobao nodded obediently. Mo Xiuyao sat at the side and looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. "If you don't know, then you don't need to study with your grandfather in the future. Father will let your uncle teach you, how about that?" Mo Xiaobao's face immediately fell. Compared with his eldest uncle, who was gentle and elegant but always made him a little scared, he preferred his great-grandfather, who was kind and benevolent. Yili looked at the father and son helplessly. She could feel the unpleasing aura from a few hundred meters away. "Xiuyao, your injuries haven't healed yet. Rest for today. If there's anything, we can talk about it tomorrow." Mo Xiuyao's expression relaxed as he nodded. Mo Xiaobao's eyes brightened, blinking his big eyes at Yili. "Nyangqin, Xiaobao wants to sleep with Nyangqin." Yili was about to answer, but Mo Xiuyao didn't hesitate to pick up Mo Xiaobao and put him on his lap. Looking down at him, he said, "Little brat, you're almost 6 years old and you still want to sleep with Lili. Do you want to be laughed at?" Mo Xiaobao was dissatisfied, arguing with reason. "Father, you're already 30 years old, why do you still want to sleep with Nyangqin?" Pfft. Yili finally couldn't hold back her laughter. Seeing the adult and child looking at her at the same time, she quickly waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. I still have some things to deal with in the study. You guys can slowly discuss it." Saying this, she ran away under the two's stare. "I want to sleep with Nyangqin," Mo Xiaobao said firmly. "Li is my wife. If you want someone to accompany you, go find your wife," Mo Xiuyao said. "Nyangqin is my mother. Go find your mother." Mo Xiaobao widened his big eyes. Mo Xiuyao's mouth twitched, his expression fierce. "Only Nyangqin can sleep with Nyangqin. Those who sleep with Nyangqin are all cowardly and useless little brats." Mo Xiaobao was conflicted. "Where's my Nyangqin?" Mo Xiuyao's expression was calm as he said calmly, "When you grow up, you can go find her yourself." Outside the door, Yili heard the two's nonsensical conversation and turned to leave with a dark expression. When Yili and Mo Xiuyao returned to Glass City, all kinds of administrative matters came crashing down. Although Su Hongyu was there were still many things that required Mo Xiuyao to personally deal with. The first thing that came was the large amount of news regarding Ren Qining sent from the Chu state. Yili and Mo Xiuyao had already started preparing for the military exercise before they left Glass City. In the study, Mo Xiuyao stared at the thick pile of documents in front of him and raised his eyebrows. The efficiency of the Prince Ding Mansion's intelligence network was very good. In less than a month, all kinds of news regarding Ren Qining had been sent to the Prince Ding Mansion study. Looking at the information, even Mo Xiuyao couldn't help but marvel at how deeply Ren Qining had hidden himself. Ren Qining looked like a youth in his 20s, but in reality, he was the same age as Tan Jiji. He was already 37 or 38 years old. To a normal person, this age was not considered young, but to a person who wanted to conquer the world, he was still too young. This person, Fang 12, had not taken a step into the Central Plains for more than 20 years after arriving at a tribe in northern Jin. In these 20 years, he had slowly gained a foothold in the northern region. He had slowly subdued the various tribes in northern Jin, essentially agreeing to the entire northern region. Without anyone, including the Prince Ding Mansion, noticing, he had quietly expanded the northern region into a place with more than 100,000 elite soldiers. To put it bluntly, even if Ren Qining could not succeed in reviving his country, his current strength was enough to make him king of the northern region. From this, it seemed that Tan Jiji, who had been jumping around happily between the Dechu state and Nanzhao, was more like a smokescreen that Enchanting had placed in front of people. It was just unknown if this smokescreen was intentional or not. Lang Haoyu just sent news. Mo Jingqi is preparing to move troops to the northern region, Su Hongyu said calmly. Move troops to the northern region. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and looked sideways at Lu Jingxian and the other generals sitting on the side. He asked, can the Chu army defeat the army of the northern region? Lu Jingxian thought for a moment and said, in terms of national strength and military strength, the Chu army has no reason not to be able to defeat the northern region. But in recent years, the northern region has been in chaos and various tribes have gone on expeditions. Although the northern region only has a few 100,000 troops, they can be said to be elite troops that have survived hundreds of battles. And although the Dechu state fought a war a few years ago, its record is worrying. Feng Zhiyao laughed coldly. What is the point of the prince being concerned about whether or not he can win? Even if you are willing to send troops to help him pacify the northern Jin, he wouldn't dare to let the Mahist army enter the pass. He has taken most of his troops to the front line at Hong Pass. Mo Xiaoyao smiled in a rare good-natured manner. I am just worried that Mo Jingqi is too useless. If the northern region army really enters, it will not be a good thing for us. If he was worried about the safety of the Dechu state, he would not have purposely provoked Mo Jingqi in an city. He only hoped that the generals under Mo Jingqi would not disappoint him too much. Su Qingchen said thoughtfully, if there are no accidents, in at most 3 months, there will be battles between the north and the south. What are the prince's plans? Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Plans? Shouldn't we be preparing for military exercises? Xiling will fight Nanzhao, and the Dechu state will fight the northern region. Let's just play with ourselves. Everyone was speechless. Playing with ourselves. Prince, you really have a good personality. Chapter 558. After discussing the matter of Enchanting, the topic of conversation naturally turned to the military exercises that had been prepared for several months. Regardless of whether it was Su Hongyu and the other civil officials, or Lu Jingxian and Zhang Qilan and the other military generals, this was undoubtedly an extremely novel matter. In this era, battles were fought from time to time. As a result, there were many who questioned the true significance of this so-called military exercise. However, regardless of what was said, preparations had been made for several months. Everyone was looking forward to it. Upon hearing Mo Xiaoyao's question, Zhang Qilan immediately replied, Prince, please be at ease. According to the prince and princess's instructions, preparations have already been made. The location will be within a radius of 300 li, with Hongzhou as the center. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and stated, the area is large enough. Very good. Just make the preparations according to the previous instructions. Then Prince, when will the time be? Lu Jingxian asked. Mo Xiaoyao lazily raised his eyelids and glanced at him, asking, will the enemy tell you when to launch his sneak attack? Just make the preparations first. Yes, this subordinate obeys. Princess consort, Princess Chang'e has arrived. Yili was seated in the small study, looking at files when Zhuo Jing came in to report. Yili was somewhat surprised. She had just returned and already had a pile of matters to attend to. To be honest, she had somewhat forgotten about the matter of Princess Chang'e. Setting down her brush, Yili said, invite her in. Not long after, Princess Chang'e stepped into the study. After not seeing her for 2 months, the originally delicate and charming little princess seemed to have lost some weight. Her entire person seemed to have matured greatly. However, her originally bright eyes were now somewhat dim and sorrowful. Greetings to Princess Ding. Princess Chang'e curtsied and saluted. Yili stepped forward and pulled her up. After sizing her up, she said, the princess seems to have lost quite a bit of weight. Is it because the servants are not taking good care of you? Princess Changle promptly shook her head and replied, Princess Consort's words are too serious. The servants of the prince's estate treat Wuyo very well. After following Feng Xiao and company back to Glass City, Princess Changle abandoned her original title of princess and used the nickname given to her by the Empress. Therefore, other than Feng Xiao, Zhuo Jing, and a few others who followed her to Nanzhao, everyone else in the Prince Ding mansion called her Miss Wuyo. They didn't even mention the surname Mo. Seeing Princess Changle grow up so much, Yili sighed helplessly in her heart. Pulling Princess Changle to the side, she sat down and said, It is good that you have not suffered any grievances. If there is anything that your subordinates have not handled properly, feel free to tell me. Or, you can tell Steward Mo and Zhuo Jing. Don't make yourself suffer, understand? Princess Changle's eyes reddened slightly. Gazing at Yili, she gratefully stated, Everyone treats me extremely well. How could I possibly suffer any grievances? Today, I came to bid farewell to Princess Consort. I want to move out. Yili stared blankly. Frowning slightly, she asked, Why? Princess Changle replied, I know that everyone treats me very well. However, Wuyo is still an outsider. The Prince Ding mansion is not like any other place. Moving out gives me a bit more freedom. Smiling faintly, Yili asked, Could it be that your uncle Prince Ding and I will restrict your freedom in this mansion? No, that is not what I meant. Princess Changle was somewhat at a loss. For a moment, it seemed that she did not know how to explain this to Yili. In reality, it was not that Yili did not understand her meaning. Even if she and Mo Xiuyao trusted Princess Changle, in the end, she was still Mo Jingqi's daughter. In addition, although there were not many people in Li City who knew Princess Changle, there were still a few. If the news that Princess Changle was living in the Prince Ding mansion were to spread, it was possible that in the future, there would be even more twists and turns. However, this 13 or 14-year-old child before her had to think of so many problems. Yili could not help but feel somewhat distressed. Perhaps understanding Yili's thoughts, Princess Changle revealed a bright smile. Pulling on Yili's hand, she said, Princess Ding, I know that you are doing this for my own good. However, I have already grown up and left imperial mother and maternal grandfather. Isn't it necessary for them to feel at ease by becoming an adult? It's not like I don't have anything. Imperial mother gave me enough silver to live in luxury for the rest of my life. When they left, they also left behind 2 trusted aides of the Hua family to take care of me. Moreover, I am in the northwest. Princess Ding will definitely not allow anyone to bully me, right? Yili smiled. Reaching out, she stroked the little girl's hair and said, As expected, you have grown up. However, as a girl, what plans do you have for the future? Tilting her head, Princess Changle thought for a moment. Looking at Yili, she resolutely stated, I want to study medicine. I know that the Northwest's restrictions on women are not as severe as the Dechu states. After I have completed my studies, perhaps I can open a medical clinic to treat patients. Smiling, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked, Then who do you want to study medicine from? How do you want to become a disciple? You must know that nowadays, very few physicians accept young girls as their apprentices. Medicine is not something that you can learn by reading a few books. Resolutely, Princess Changle replied, I can disguise myself as a woman and become an apprentice at the medical clinic. Otherwise, I will spend money to hire a formidable physician to teach me. Imperial Mother said that so long as one wants to learn, there will always be a way to learn something. Moreover, it's not like I don't know anything. I know how to memorize herbal texts and recognize many medicinal ingredients. At the very least, I am better than someone who knows nothing. It will be easier for Master to accept me. Seeing that the young lady had truly made up her mind, Yili beamed at her and whispered, "Seeing that you are so sincere, I'll tell you a secret." Princess Changle blinked her eyes, looking at her curiously. Yili softly replied, "The Prince Ding mansion has 2 divine physicians." "Ah." "Divine physician Shin, who cured Prince Ding's uncle. But I haven't seen him for so long." Princess Changle's eyes brightened, but she still asked doubtfully. Smiling, Yili replied, "Sir Shin and Sir Lin are bored in their residences, so they moved to the city and opened a medical clinic. If you can have them teach you, you naturally won't have to worry about your medical skills." Although Princess Changle did not know who Dr. Lin was, the name of Shenyang was known throughout the world. Hearing Yi Li's words, Princess Changle made a decision. Nodding her head, she replied, "Thank you, Princess Ding. I know what to do." Raising her brows, Yi Li smiled and replied, "Sir Shen and Dr. Lin may not necessarily accept you." Princess Changle resolutely replied, "I will definitely do my best to beg Sir Shen to accept me." Yi Li no longer tried to persuade her. Sighing, she patted the back of Princess Changle's hand and said, "Since you have already made up your mind, I will say no more. Later, I will have someone choose a suitable residence near the prince's residence. You cannot refuse this. In the end, the prince's residence is more familiar with Glass City. It will be more convenient." Princess Changle no longer refused. Her clear eyes reddened, but she still smiled and replied, "Then, many thanks, Princess Ding." The two chatted for a while before Princess Changle rose and took her leave. After sending Princess Changle off, Yi Li pondered for a while before calling for Zhuo Jing and asking, "Has young Master Feng San treated Princess Changle well these past few days?" Zhuo Jing stared blankly for a moment. Although he did not understand the meaning behind Princess Changle's question, he still answered truthfully, there was nothing good or bad about it. Princess Changle lived in the guest courtyard and did not often meet with young Master Feng San. Yi Li frowned slightly. Thinking for a while, she asked, "Then, what about on the way back?" Zhuo Jing replied, "On the way back, young Master Feng San did not seem too willing to get close to Princess Changle. This subordinate remembers that once again, we missed the town and rested in the wilderness. Lin Han asked young Master Feng San to deliver some food to Princess Changle. In the end, young Master Feng San threw the food to me. However, young Master Feng San did not treat Princess Changle rudely." Yi Li nodded and said, "I understand. Later, have Feng San come over when he is finished." This subordinate, Feng Zhiyao, requests an audience with Princess Changle. Less than an hour later, Feng Zhiyao appeared outside Yi Li's study. "Enter." Hearing Yi Li's words, Feng Zhiyao stepped into the study. Smiling, he said, "Princess Changle has summoned this subordinate so soon after returning. This subordinate feels extremely honored. What orders does Princess Changle have?" Yi Li was disinclined to pay attention to his mischievous smile. Setting down the dossier, she picked up the teacup by her side and took a sip before indifferently stating, "Princess Changle wishes to use Princess Changle." Feng Zhiyao was startled. Before he could speak, he heard Yi Li continue, "I have already agreed." Feng Zhiyao frowned. Somewhat disapproving, he asked, "Why?" "Princess Changle is still a young girl. How will she live by herself when she moves out?" Yi Li smiled faintly and replied, "A young girl. Princess Changle is already 14 years old. Although the Prince Ding mansion and the imperial family of the Dechu state are of the same bloodline, they have long been separated by blood. Neither relative nor friend, how can a girl like her remain in the Prince Ding mansion?" Feng Zhiyao stared fixedly at Yi Li. It was obvious that he did not believe her reasoning. Yi Li did not mind. Raising her eyebrows, she smiled and said, "All right. Actually, this consort feels that young Master Feng San seems to have an opinion about Princess Chang'e. Since this is the case, Princess Chang'e is no more than an insignificant young girl, while young Master Feng San is the prince's trusted aide. This consort will naturally take care of your feelings first. Feng Zhiyao's complexion was somewhat unsightly. When have I ever had an opinion about Princess Chang'e? Faced with Yi Li's smile that was not a smile, Feng Zhiyao could only silently rub his nose. Then, Princess Chang'e, there is no need for you to have her move out. After all, she is still a child. I've already said that it was she who wanted to move out. A girl living under someone else's roof is unavoidably sensitive. All along the way, you have been acting strangely towards her. Can you blame her for feeling uncomfortable living in the Prince Ding mansion? You also know that she is still a child. Since this is the case, the grudges of adults have nothing to do with her. Not only you, but I'm afraid that everyone in the mansion who knows of her identity also has a knot in their hearts. Although she would not be rude, how could a girl who was as meticulous as her not be able to detect the attitude of others towards her? It was no wonder that Princess Chang'e had come to say her farewells on the second day of her return. However, this could not be blamed on anyone. After all, her father was Mo Jingqi. Everyone knew that it was wrong to take their anger out on someone else. However, how many people were capable of doing so? I know that this matter is my fault. Princess Chang'e, please have her stay, Feng Zhiyao said. Yi Li shook her head and replied, Princess Chang'e has already decided to become an apprentice to a master and study medicine. It will be more convenient for her to live outside. The only reason I have asked you to come is to have you find a suitable residence for her, as well as take care of her outside. There are many people and matters within the Prince Ding mansion. Even if we instruct her, it is not certain that she will not be wronged. Feng Zhiyao was silent for a moment. He felt that Yi Li's words were reasonable. Nodding his head, he replied, this subordinate understands. Princess Chang'e, please be at ease. Chapter 559. At the end of the 10th month, the Dechu state officially declared war on the north. Almost at the same time, Shilin Genom of Gojoseon ordered his son, Genom of Gojoseon heir Leitingfeng to lead 200,000 soldiers to the border between the south and Nanzhao. For a time, all the countries began to mobilize their troops. Even the northern tribes, who were in the middle of the bitter cold, began to move. At this time, the military exercise that the Prince Ding mansion had been preparing for several months began. In the morning, the General Zhang Qilan, who was stationed in the camp 30 li outside of Li City, received an order, lead the troops at full speed to Jiantianya, 50 li northwest of Hangzhou, and seize the natural stronghold Jiantianya. This order came too quickly and could be said to be completely unprepared. Fortunately, the Mahist army had always been well trained. In addition, everyone's hearts had been stretched taut recently, so they did not panic this time. When he received the order, Zhang Qilan was eating dinner with a few of his subordinates and discussing the military situation. Looking at the graceful but elegant handwriting on the letter, Zhang Qilan jumped up and shouted to his subordinates, pass down the order, break camp and depart in an hour. But he felt strange. Why did this order look like Wang Fei's handwriting? The generals all paused. The braver ones quickly asked, General, we are. Zhang Qilan chuckled and said, it's starting. Little ones, work harder. We have to beat that old guy until he cries for his father and mother. Everyone couldn't help but laugh. The atmosphere in the tent instantly relaxed. Zhang Qilan glared and roared, hurry up and get ready. Immediately, everyone dispersed out of the tent and went to dispatch their subordinates. After sending his subordinates away, Zhang Qilan looked at the letter in his hand again. He wiped his face and turned to prepare for his expedition. General Zhang, sorry to disturb you so late at night. Outside the tent, an elegant voice said with a faint smile. Zhang Qilan paused and then realized who had spoken. He quickly went forward. The curtain outside the tent was lifted and the person outside walked in. Zhang Qilan hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "This subordinate greets Princess." Unlike usual, Yili was wearing a long gray cloak, but her hair was combed into a man's bun. From the white hem of the cloak, it could be seen that it was a man's clothing. Zhang Qilan had some doubts but still asked, "Wang Fei, this is?" Yili smiled and said, "General Zhang is about to go to war. This one is not talented enough to recommend myself as an advisor. I hope General will not reject me. Wang Fei is saying that she wants to march with us." Zhang Qilan asked in surprise. Yili nodded. Zhang Qilan said with some difficulty, "This Wang Fei's body is priceless." Zhang Qilan was startled, but he quickly reacted. With over 10,000 soldiers, it was impossible for them to reach Jiantian Cliff without being discovered by Prince Ding. The worst thing was that there was a division of the Western Army that they had to pass through on their way to Jiantian Cliff. Wang Yi would definitely not allow them to reach Jiantianya so smoothly. Feng Zhiyao leading the Black Cloud Cavalry to open up a path in front was much better than being stopped and beaten when they reached the place. In the darkness of the night, a group of people rode their horses forward. Behind them was a long line of Mahist army soldiers. Inside the Western Army camp, Mo Xiuyao was still dressed in white, his hair white like snow. He sat lazily in the large tent, looking at the map in front of him as if he was deep in thought. Lu Jingxian sat next to him and said, "Prince, Zhang Qilan can be considered to be from the Black Cloud Cavalry and has always been fast. I'm afraid that they have already left the camp." Mo Xiuyao nodded and raised his eyebrows. "No matter how fast they are, they only have 10,000 Black Cloud Cavalry. If they want to rely on 10,000 Black Cloud Cavalry to snatch Jiantian Cliff from us, they must be dreaming." Lu Jingxian nodded and said with a frown, "However, although we have 50,000 Black Cloud Cavalry, our normal strength is clearly weaker than the enemy. The Black Cloud Cavalry's attacks are strong, but their defense is a bit weaker. Even if we take Jiantian Cliff first, to rely on 50,000 Black Cloud Cavalry to defend against 100,000 Mahist army's attacks will be a bit difficult." Mo Xiuyao looked at Lu Jingxian with a smile. "What? Is General Lu afraid of Zhang Qilan?" Lu Jingxian's expression changed. He stuck out his chest and said, "Who would be afraid of him? Prince, don't worry, I swear to defend Jiantian Cliff to the death." Mo Xiuyao waved his hand and said, "What do you mean swear to the death? Don't forget that Jiantian Cliff is not the final goal. If we lose all of our men at Jiantian Cliff, how are we going to fight the later battles?" Chapter 560. Lu Jingxian was a little surprised and asked, "What does Prince have in mind?" Mo Xiuyao thought for a while and said, "Zhang Qilan will definitely rush to Jiantianya with all his might. Let's not rush over there. No matter what, we are still faster than him. Let's add some obstacles to their path. Also, add a line of defense 20 li in front of Jiantianya. Even if Jiantianya cannot defend in the end, it will at least deplete half of their forces." "I understand." Lu Jingxian nodded. Mo Xiuyao nodded with satisfaction and said, "Then Jiantianya will be handed over to you." Hearing this, Zhang Qilan was stunned. "Hand it over to me? Then Prince?" Mo Xiuyao said with a smile that was not a smile, "I can't tell you." The journey of the East Army was not smooth. On the afternoon of the second day, the army met with the first line of defense set up by the enemy. However, Feng Zhiyao, who had set out earlier to open up the path, was nowhere to be seen. The enemy did not have many people blocking their path, less than 2,000 to 3,000 people. If it was on flat ground, an army of 100,000 would be able to trample them to death. However, at this time, they were circling around the mountain path. It was as if one man could hold off 10,000 men. Zhang Qilan was so angry that he kept calling Lu Jingxian despicable and shameless. However, no matter how despicable and shameless the enemy was, they still had to fight. Zhang Qilan was not a brute who only knew how to shout and curse. He immediately sent out a group of people to sneak around the enemy's back and attack from the front and back. Even so, they wasted almost 6 to 8 hours in this place. By the time they met with 2 or 3 similar obstacles along the way, Zhang Qilan had already understood that Lu Jingxian was trying to delay them. Yet, this was the kind of scheme that couldn't be broken. Even if they knew that Lu Jingxian was trying to delay them, they had no choice but to follow this path. If they wanted to take a detour, it would take even longer. The final goal of this act was not the Sky Stream Cliff, but a small town that was dozens of miles away from the Sky Stream Cliff. There were 40,000 soldiers in the small city, and Mo Xiuyao's Western Army's mission was to occupy the small city. Yi Li and Zhang Qilan's mission was to reinforce and destroy the Western Army. The mountain stream cliff was the most important place because both the Eastern and Western armies had to pass through here to reach the small city. If Mo Xiuyao had enough troops, he could naturally pass through Jiantianya and take the small city. However, he only had 50,000 Black Cloud cavalry and 40,000 Mahist army. On the other hand, the East Army had 10,000 Black Cloud cavalry and 150,000 Mahist army. The current commander of the small city could not be ignored. He was the Mahist army's commander of Jiangxi City, Yuan Pei, who was very good at defending cities. Thus, if Mo Xiuyao used all of his troops to attack the city, if he was unable to take down the small city in 3 days, the Western Army would be surrounded by the Mahist army. Thus, he could only leave a portion of his troops to Lu Jingxian to delay the reinforcements. However, this also reduced the strength of the attacking troops. Because of the ambushes along the way, the Eastern Army used a total of 5 days to reach the lower 3 heavens 20 li away from Jiantianya. Looking at the banners and cold swords on the hillside, Zhang Qilan laughed coldly and turned around to order them to set up camp. His subordinates were all eager to give it a try. The past few days of marching had made them all want to vent their frustrations. They all asked Zhang Qilan for permission to fight. Zhang Qilan waved his hand to suppress everyone's requests. The enemy had the geographical advantage. Attacking in broad daylight was the same as seeking death. What does Mr. Chu think? Zhang Qilan turned his head and asked Yi Li, who was sitting to the side. Everyone also stopped talking and looked at the white-clothed young master sitting to the side. Although many people in the army had seen Yi Li before, they were not familiar with her. Yi Li had changed into men's clothing and changed her appearance slightly. She also rarely spoke, so none of these generals recognized that this somewhat silent young master was actually their Princess Ding. Of course, this was also related to the fact that these generals were proud and did not like Yi Li, who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Naturally, there were not many people who were willing to talk to her. It seems like General Lu wants to stop us outside Jiantianya. At this time, Prince Ding should have already led his troops to attack the city. Yi Li muttered. The people below could not help but scoff. Who didn't know how to say such words? Just by looking at the situation in front of them, they knew what the other party meant. However, Zhang Qilan said thoughtfully, Mr. Chu means. Prince Ding is not at Jiantianya right now. If it's only Lu Jingxian. I don't think he has many troops. I might be able to break through Jiantianya in 3 days. Yi Li shook her head and said, if we break through Jiantianya in 3 days, how many casualties does the general intend to suffer? Jiantianya can be considered a natural stronghold. Naturally, it is easy to defend and difficult to attack. If we lose all our troops here, how are we going to reinforce General Yuan? One of the generals below could not help but say, but if we don't break through, how are we going to get there? If we want to take a detour, it will take at least 7 to 8 days. Also, if we walk from the south, we will have to cross mountains and rivers. By the time we get there, we might not even be able to fight. If we go from the north, it will be a large swamp. We won't be able to cross at all. Zhang Qilan looked at Yi Li and asked, "What does Mr. Chu mean?" Yi Li pointed at the map on the table and said, "General Yuan is good at defending cities. Even Prince Ding may not be able to break through the city in a short amount of time. What I mean is, to wipe out all the troops at Jiantianya." Everyone was shocked. Zhang Qilan frowned and said, "This will take time. What if we can't reinforce the city in time?" Yi Li did not frown and said calmly, "We can just take it back after it's broken." A deputy general hesitated and said, "But, once the city is broken, the exercise will be over." Yi Li said calmly, "It will only be over if one side concedes defeat or both sides suffer great losses. Is it possible that the city is taken by the enemy during the battle and the reinforcements have to go back the way they came?" Everyone was silent and seemed to be deep in thought. The tent was silent for a while. Zhang Qilan slapped the table and stood up, saying, "Good. We'll do as Mr. Chu says. The success or failure of this mission will be handed over to Mr. Chu. Do you have a plan?" Yi Li looked at Zhang Qilan with a smile and said slowly, "I'm still thinking about it." The night on the battlefield was not peaceful. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. Killing and arson were common on the battlefield. Therefore, when Yi Li was woken up by the noise outside for the third time that night, she was not surprised. She got up and put on her clothes and cloak before walking out of the tent. Qin Feng immediately appeared at the door. "Master." Yi Li frowned slightly and said, "Why aren't you resting?" Qin Feng said, "Wei Lin has gone to rest. He'll come to replace me in 2 hours." This time, Yi Li did not bring Zhuo Jing and Lin Han. Instead, she brought Qin Feng and Wei Lin out. After all, Prince Ding and the king, as well as all the generals in the city, were not there. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han had been left behind to help Su Qingchen. Yi Li said, "You all go rest. Just send 2 people to keep watch." Qin Feng shook his head and said, "I'll go back to rest in a while. It won't affect tomorrow's work." Yi Li knew she could not persuade him, so she did not say anything more. She looked curiously at the place where the fire was shining and asked, "Whose people are making trouble?" Qin Feng held back his laughter and said, "It's a few of General Zhang's subordinates. They seem to have agreed to attack the defending army at night. Each of them would hold on for 2 hours and then retreat regardless of the outcome. This is the 3rd wave. The defending army on the mountain probably won't be able to sleep tonight." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at the place where the sound of fighting could be heard. She raised her eyebrows and smiled, "Interesting. Is this their own idea?" Qin Feng nodded and said, "It seems that they talked to General Zhang after dinner. General Zhang probably agreed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have acted on their own." It seemed that Qin Feng had a good impression of those hot-tempered young people. Although he did not speak for them, he did explain that their actions did not violate military rules. Yi Li smiled and walked out, saying, "It's always good for young people to have their own ideas. Even if they make a mistake in the drill, it's better than making a mistake on the battlefield." "What does Wang Fei mean?" Qin Feng frowned. Yi Li said, "It's fine if they harass him once or twice, but if they do it again and again, do they think Lu Jingxian is a vegetarian?" Qin Feng was silent. Yi Li smiled and said, "Let's go and take a look." Qin Feng hurriedly caught up and asked curiously, "Wang Fei is saying that they will have a problem." Yi smiled faintly and said, Lu Jingxian is an old general who has been on the battlefield for a long time. How could he be played by a few young people? If they stop after 1 or 2 times, the other side will be more cautious and probably won't be able to have a peaceful night. But if they do it again and again, how could Lu Jingxian not make a move? As the saying goes, going too far is as bad as not going far enough. Then Qin Feng frowned and said, should we send someone to tell General Zhang? Yi shook her head and said, General Zhang and General Lu have known each other for decades. It's impossible that he doesn't understand him. He will definitely be prepared. There's no need for us to meddle. Just watch. As the two were talking, Zhang Qilan's clear voice came from behind them. Mr. Chu hasn't rested yet this late. Did those young people steal it? The two returned and saw Zhang Qilan walk over with his head held high. He was wearing armor and battle robes and looked like he was about to go into battle. Yi couldn't help but smile and say, General Zhang, it's so late. What are you doing? Zhang Qilan pretended to be angry and said, those young people don't know what's good for them. They provoked old Lu. I have to take them back while they're still fine. Hearing this, Yi laughed clearly and said, then I'll have to trouble General Zhang. Zhang Qilan cupped his hands and said, I'll take my leave first. Chapter 561. At dawn, a group of overly excited and hot-blooded youths were indeed dragged back by Zhang Qilan, their faces covered in dirt. Yi and Wei Lin, who came later to replace Qin Feng, waited until the sounds of fighting at the front had stopped. Only after another hour did they see the group of people return to the camp. The young generals who were originally in high spirits drooped their heads, as if they were vegetables that had been hit by frost. As soon as they entered the camp, they saw Yi smiling at them while looking at a carriage. The expressions of the young generals became even more awkward. They felt that the general had found such a young military advisor who they didn't know where he came from. He didn't know anything and only said a few useless words from time to time, but the general valued him so much. These young men were naturally unconvinced. They all thought that they were much better than this pretty boy. Now that they had lost so much face in front of him, their expressions naturally didn't look too good. Mr. Chu, you haven't rested yet. Zhang Qilan saw Yi and naturally went up to greet her. Yi smiled and said, General, you haven't rested either, right? You've worked hard, General. Are you all right? Zhang Qilan sighed and said, Fortunately, you're fine. He turned around and glared at everyone, then roared, Why aren't you going back to rest? Are you waiting to be punished? Hearing this, the young generals all scattered like birds and beasts. Seeing how everyone looked at Zhang Qilan as if he was a killing god, Yi couldn't help but laugh softly and say, General clearly has no intention of punishing them. Why are you purposely scaring them? Zhang Qilan sighed helplessly and said, The people who came out this time are all young brats. Not only have they never been on a proper battlefield, but they're still hot-blooded and charging forward. If they really went on the battlefield, who knows what would happen? It turned out that the first 2 waves of ambushes had caused the enemy to be flustered for a while. These brats got carried away and decided to take turns to fight until dawn. This way, the enemy naturally couldn't sleep for the entire night, but their own people could take turns to rest. His idea was not bad, but he forgot to observe the surrounding positions and the situation of the enemy. Halfway through the 3rd sneak attack, Lu Jingxian sent 2 groups of soldiers and horses to quietly flank them from both sides. If it wasn't for Zhang Qilan leading the troops, even if they didn't arrive in time, they wouldn't be able to match the 4,000 to 5,000 troops that they brought. Even those 4 to 5 young generals would have died there. The battlefield had always been cruel and merciless. If one didn't come from an aristocratic family, there wouldn't be many captains in an army of millions. Out of a few thousand captains, there would at most be less than 100 who could become deputy generals. And out of these less than 100 deputy generals, there would at most be 2 or 3 generals. It wasn't that these people didn't have the potential to become generals, but that in the process of becoming generals, they had already been engulfed by the shame of the battlefield. Mr. Chu, please train these kids more in the future, Zhang Qilan said sincerely. He knew Princess Consort's abilities. Not to mention the elusive and invincible Qi Lin, who was personally trained by Princess Consort, Qin Feng, Zhua Jing, and the others by Princess Consort's side were all rising stars if they were placed in the military camp. From this, it could be seen that Princess Consort's methods of teaching people were ingenious. Yili smiled and said, General Zhang is a good general. In this era, it was rare to see a general who was so considerate of his subordinates. Zhang Qilan laughed brightly and said straightforwardly, these youths are slightly rash, but they are the future of the Mahist army. There will be a day when us old men will be too old to go onto the battlefield. In the future, we will have to rely on them. Yili smiled and said, General is in the prime of his life, it is too early to say the word old. This one will remember what General has said. This was a promise. Zhang Qilan raised his hands in a bow and said, Thank you, young master. It is still early, young master should return to the tent to rest for a while. Many thanks for General's concern. The next day, when the people of the Eastern Army found that the Western Army guarding the front was still full of energy, a group of youths couldn't help but explode. The tent became a noisy mess. Yili smiled as she sat in a corner of the tent and listened to the discussion of these youths. Zhang Qilan was annoyed by their noise and rolled his eyes. What are you all arguing about? The Jiantian cliff in front is only 20 li, and the guards from last night were tired by your noise. Don't tell me that Lu Jingxian won't transfer the guards from Jiantian cliff over. If you can't get past this obstacle, do you want to fly to Jiantian cliff from the sky? Everyone was silent for a while and looked at each other. General, doesn't that mean that we did all this work for free last night? Even if they launched sneak attacks every day, as long as the other side took turns, unless they forcefully broke through the defensive line in front of them, there was nothing else they could do. What's more, they had almost suffered a great loss on the first night of the sneak attack. Zhang Qilan scratched the beard on his chin and said, saying that we did all this work for free is not entirely correct. You bunch of brats always get carried away with everything you do. It's fine if you harass them once or twice, but you are addicted to taking turns. Isn't that giving Lu Jingxian a chance to beat you up? The young generals were a little embarrassed, and the older generals sitting next to them also began to chuckle. General, what should we do next? A young general stepped out from the crowd and asked expectantly. Zhang Qilan frowned and turned to look at Yili, who was sitting next to him, and asked, What does Mr. Chu think? Yili tapped the fan in her hand carelessly and said, The other side has the higher ground, so it will take a lot of time and effort to forcefully attack them. Let's continue our nightly harassment, but don't let General Lu catch us again. Next time, General Zhang might not be able to lead the troops to help everyone out. A few young generals looked at Yili with some dissatisfaction and said, Since Mr. Chu is the military advisor, he must have some tricks up his sleeve. It's just that we won't be able to take them down if we launch sneak attacks every night. If we drag this out for 10 days or half a month, we can just admit defeat without fighting. Yili raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, Then what do you all think? This subordinate requests to be the vanguard and open a path for the army. A young general cupped his hands and said to Zhang Qilan. The others followed suit and asked for Zhang Qilan's permission. It was obvious that they wanted to fight the enemy head-on. Yili looked at them plainly and said, I don't object to fighting head-on, based on the enemy's strength. If we bet on half of their strength, we will definitely be able to take this place. However, I would like to remind all of you that although this is just a drill, if this were a real battle, it would mean that at least half of the 100,000 soldiers here and outside would lose their lives on this small hill in front of Enchanting. So what? Someone asked softly. Yili smiled and said, if losing half of our soldiers, including the lives of all of you here, isn't a big deal. In that case, how would the remaining 50,000 soldiers pass through the Heavenly Stream Cliff, which was known as a natural barrier? How many soldiers will be left after they pass through? Or do you all think that, even if we manage to pass through, we will be able to save General Top Scorer from being surrounded? I would like to remind all of you that based on my understanding of Prince Ding, the number of soldiers left behind at Enchanting is at most a third of the Western Army. The remaining 2/3 are fresh soldiers who have yet to participate in the battle. Everyone here has sacrificed themselves, but may I ask, what will happen to General Top Scorer and the soldiers guarding the city? It's fine if you're not smart enough, but even if you want to be a fierce general who can defeat the enemy with brute force, you won't be able to fight better than ordinary soldiers, right? Rather than being a hindrance on the battlefield, it's better to stay at the back. The young men were so angry that their faces turned red. One of them with a bad temper stepped forward and pointed at Yili with a red face and coaxed, "You're just a weak scholar. What right do you have to talk about us like this?" Yili looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile and slowly said, "Because," with a swish, the fan was swung open and like a sharp blade, it slashed towards the young man's throat. That person jumped in fright and quickly bent over to dodge, but he didn't expect his lower body to be kicked in the acupoint. Before he could react, his body swayed, he fell to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. Yili waved her fan twice and said casually, "You can't even beat a weak scholar." Everyone was speechless. This time, they were really hit hard. In the past few years, the Mahist army had placed great importance on nurturing young generals. Therefore, these young generals were only in their early 20s, but most of them were already lieutenants or even captains. However, most of them had never been on the battlefield. This was what Yili was most worried about. The battlefield had always been a huge meat grinder. It didn't matter if you were an ordinary person or a genius. Once you were involved, the one who achieved the most in the end wasn't the smartest or the most powerful one, but the one who survived. Since ancient times, many geniuses had been drowned out like sand by the waves. Although Yili didn't expect them to understand what a real battlefield was this time, and they would only be able to learn when they were on the battlefield, at least they had to suppress the arrogance of these geniuses. As if she didn't see everyone's shocked expressions, Yili looked at everyone with a smile and said, "Don't say that I bullied you. These two people learned from me. If you beat them, don't even talk about going to fight with General Liu. Even if you want to go to Xiling and destroy Genom of Gojosian, I won't stop you." Everyone looked at each other and exchanged glances. Yili seemed to be afraid that the fire wasn't burning hot enough and continued to pour oil on it. "If you don't have confidence in fighting one-on-one, you can fight together." Qin Feng and Wei Lin could obviously understand Yili's meaning. Wei Lin snorted coldly and said, "Don't waste time. Let's fight together." This obviously contemptuous tone finally snapped the last string in everyone's mind. No one knew who shouted, but 5 or 6 young people all pounced towards Qin Feng and Wei Lin at the same time. Of course, Wei Lin, who had just drawn hatred to himself, was the one they focused on. Yili retreated to the side and leisurely leaned against Qin Feng and Wei Lin, moving among the youths with ease. Rather than a group fight, it was more like two people playing with a group of crazy kittens. These youths were indeed not as good as their peers in the Mahist army, but compared to Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who came from Qilin and were the best among them, they were not enough. The youth who had just been kicked to the ground by Yili was still sitting on the ground and didn't get up. He didn't join the fight. It was because he stood outside the fight that he could see the gap between himself and Qin Feng and Wei Lin more clearly. He looked at Yili and finally drooped his proud head. Yili kicked him with interest and asked, "Why don't you try?" The youth sat on the ground and didn't get up. He shook his head and said, "I'm not an idiot. We can't beat them at all. Do you want to make a fool of yourself?" Yili nodded and said with a smile, "You are indeed not their match, but that's not important. They are not on the same path as you. It's best if your martial arts are strong, but if you can't, there's no need to compete with them. General Zhang may not be their match." The youth said with dissatisfaction, "Then why do you want them to fight?" Yili raised her eyebrows and said, "Because compared to you, General Zhang clearly has a smart brain. You don't have anything, but you think you have everything. I think your brains need to be fixed together with your bodies." The youth opened his eyes wide and glared fiercely at Yili, saying, "We're not stupid." They were the rising stars of the Mahist army. Who didn't praise them for having a bright future? Yili nodded seriously and said, "You really aren't stupid. How can I describe your level of stupidity? Have you ever seen an idiot seeking death?" The youth's face turned red with anger. She was saying that they weren't even as stupid as idiots. Yili looked at the person in front of her with interest and couldn't help but smile. A young man in his early 20s whose emotions could rise and fall so easily. In this era where people matured early, it was quite rare. Seeing Yili's teasing smile, the youth couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. "What are you laughing at?" Yili coughed lightly and covered her mouth with her fan, saying, "Nothing, I just want to laugh." While the two were talking, Qin Feng and Wei Lin had already put down a group of children who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. No matter how they went easy on them, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Therefore, the originally well-dressed young generals all fell to the ground in a sorry state. Yili looked down at everyone with a smile and said, "How is it? Do you admit defeat now?" "We admit defeat." Although the young generals were still a little depressed, the way they looked at Yili and the other two was very different from before. In the military, the strong were king. Although these young people were arrogant, they still respected the strong. The fight just now also made them understand the difference in strength between them and their opponents. "But Mr. Chu, we can't always hide in the back and be protected by others, right?" Although they knew that they were inferior, they were now on the battlefield. They had to put away their thoughts and think about it later. Right now, they had to solve the battle in front of them. Yili looked at them with a smile and asked, "You guys really want to fight?" Hearing this, everyone knew that there was hope. 6 or 7 pairs of eyes looked at Yili in unison. The anticipation and desire in their eyes made Yili feel a little pressured. Seeing this group of enthusiastic young people in front of her, Yili smiled faintly and said, "It's not impossible. Go back and choose 200 elites from your subordinates and wait for orders." "Mr. Chu, what do we need to do?" Yili said in a deep voice, "It's a secret. Remember, everything has to be done quietly. Do not attract anyone's attention, including General Zhang. The people who are discovered will stay behind to reflect." Young people all liked mysterious and exciting things. Hearing Yili say this, everyone became even more excited. Yili looked at them with a slight frown and said seriously, "Also, even though this is acting, the danger still exists. This mission can be said to be the most dangerous of the dangerous. I cannot guarantee that there will be no casualties. Do you understand?" "This subordinate understands," everyone said in unison. What Yili said was not a matter for them at all. How could there be no casualties on the battlefield? Yili nodded and said, "All right, go prepare. We will gather at the second watch period." "Yes." "Wang Fei, these brats are too immature." "Wang Fei, why do you care about them?" Wei Lin said with dissatisfaction. These brats had been rude to Wang Fei in the past few days. If they died 100 times in the Wang Fu, it wouldn't be enough. Yili smiled faintly and said, "It's a group of young people, and they're quite cute." Qin Feng and Wei Lin silently looked at each other. At the same time, they decided not to spread Wang Fei's evaluation. If the prince knew, these brats would die 100 times. Chapter 563. Before the second day of the night, a group of young soldiers had followed Yi Li's instructions and quietly led their men out of the camp. It wasn't that they were completely convinced by Yi Li's mysterious military advisor, but if they didn't follow Yi Li, they wouldn't be able to fight. Since it was already like this, they could only tactfully follow his instructions. It was unknown if this group of young soldiers had some ability or if Zhang Qilan was being courteous, but a few of them actually led their men out of the camp without missing a single one. When they stood in front of Yi Li, they couldn't help but raise their chins and feel a little proud. Yi Li only smiled faintly and nodded his head in satisfaction as he looked at the group of over 1,000 men. "Military advisor. What are we going to do?" Someone couldn't help but ask. In the darkness, Yi Li spread out a map on the ground and squatted down. He used the torch in his hand to point at a few places on the map and said, "General Zhang is leading his men to attract the attention of the enemy. You guys follow me to climb up from these 2 places and go around to the back of Jian Tianya." Someone frowned and said, "Since the military advisor already had a plan, why didn't you say so earlier? We could have sent men to scout the way." Yi Li looked at him and smiled. "Scout the way? Do you think that General Lu's men are wooden stakes and won't discover you guys? But we can't see the way at night. How are we going to get there?" Although they didn't know the details, they roughly knew where the path was after looking at the locations pointed out by the military advisor. This area was easy to defend and hard to attack. Even in the day, it was dangerous, much less at night. Yi Li stared at the young man who spoke and said, "That's why I said. I can't guarantee that there won't be any casualties. This is a battlefield." Everyone was shocked. That's right, this was a battlefield. On the battlefield, don't even talk about walking in the dark. Sometimes, even if one knew that they would die, they would still sacrifice their lives. Yi Li looked at them and said, "Those who aren't willing to go can still go back the way you came. I'll give you half an hour to communicate with your subordinates. I want to make it clear that it's not just dangerous to climb up. Even if we reach the cliff safely, it won't be a smooth journey. If you drop the ball on the road, you will be punished according to military law." In less than a quarter of an hour, everyone returned to Yi Li. Seeing that none of the teams retreated, Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. She turned around and said, "Let's go." Although it was already the second night watch period, the night wasn't tranquil. Not far away on a hillside, the 2 armies were engaged in a fierce battle. Taking advantage of this time, the group of people, led by Qin Feng and Yi Li, quietly climbed up the steep cliff path, with Wei Lin at the back. If General Zhang grasps the opportunity well, he should be able to rush up. Feng Zhiyao nodded and said, "Let's do it like that." Yi Li turned around and looked at the people behind her and said, "Rest here for an hour and then set off." The young general behind her said, "Military advisor, we are not tired. We can move now." Yi Li glanced at him indifferently. "Who cares if you are tired or not? In a while, General Zhang and the others will be fighting. We should take advantage of the moment before dawn to make a move. After causing chaos, we will retreat before the sky turns bright." The young general who spoke rashly blushed and sat down to rest in embarrassment. Feng Zhiyao stood to the side and looked at the group of young fellows behind Yi Li with interest. He smiled and said, "It seems that young Master Chu also has a time when he can't mix well." Feng Zhiyao's eyes naturally saw that this group of young generals wasn't completely convinced by Yi Li. Yi Li didn't even bother to roll her eyes. She walked to a big tree and sat down to rest. There's no other way. I've let young Master Feng down. Sensing that Yi Li's mood wasn't very good, Feng Zhiyao touched his nose and consciously turned around to find a place to close his eyes and rest. In the temporary tent outside Jiantian Cliff, Lu Jingxian sat in a chair and closed his eyes to rest. The generals next to him all had angry expressions. There are repeated sneak attacks every night. Do they still want people to rest? Not to mention that Zhang Qilan's subordinates were very depressed these days. Lu Jingxian's side wasn't relaxed either. They had the advantage of being on the high ground. Basically, the eastern troops had to pay the price of at least 5 or 6 people to injure one of them. Moreover, Zhang Qilan definitely wouldn't fight them to the death here. It was fine during the day, but when night came, the other side wouldn't stop tormenting. At night, they couldn't see. If they weren't careful, the other side could sneak up on them. Therefore, the soldiers stationed here couldn't help but be on high alert. After all, no one knew if the other side was just testing them or would really swarm them. After a few days, both sides couldn't help but get angry. Chapter 564. General, the prince sent a letter on horseback, someone reported from outside the tent. Lu Jingxian opened his eyes and scanned the rowdy crowd. He said in a deep voice, "Come in." A soldier came in and presented a letter with both hands. Lu Jingxian opened the letter and slowly frowned after reading it. The other generals changed their expressions and hurriedly asked, "General, what orders does the prince have?" LV Jingxian casually passed the letter to a deputy general sitting below him. The deputy general stilled when he saw it. He looked dazedly at Lu Jingxian and said, "The prince is reminding General to be careful of the princess consort." The other people also passed the letter around. Lu Jingxian frowned and said, "Speaking of which, in the last few days, the princess consort has not appeared in the army at all." When the princess consort was mentioned, even though she was a woman, these generals who had fought on the battlefield still showed respect. It was not just because the princess consort had military talent that was different from other women, but also because the princess consort had done many things for the Mahist army in the last few years. For example, the promotion of soldiers, the payment of soldiers, the placement of wounded soldiers, and even the organization of the army. Many effective methods had been proposed and implemented by the princess consort. So in the eyes of these soldiers, Princess Ding was not as simple as a normal princess consort, but one of the true controllers of the Mahist army. For the prince to write a letter to remind her, this caused everyone to pay more attention to Princess Ding. But at this time, they did not know what Princess Ding was doing. At this time, Lu Jingxian found that he had overlooked an important person. It wasn't that LV Jingxian thought that Yi Li was better than Zhang Qilan when it came to commanding troops. It was just that Zhang Qilan had worked with him for more than 10 years, so they had a rough understanding of each other. But Princess Ding was an existence that they did not understand at all. The only understanding of Princess Ding was limited to the battle that she had defeated Genom of Gojoseon a few years ago. Of course, that battle was enough to make any general view her in a new light. There was a saying in the art of war, "Know thyself and know thy enemy to win 100 battles." For some reason, Lu Jingxian suddenly felt a little uneasy. Just as he was thinking about something with his head lowered, the sound of weapons and fighting could be heard from afar. Soon, a soldier came in and reported, "General, the enemy is attacking again. Fight back. Remind the soldiers at the front line not to lower their guard." LV Jingxian slapped the letter on the table. Then, he stood up and walked out of the tent. Not far away from the Sky Stream Cliff, Yi Li looked down at the place where the flames were faintly burning. Behind her, the Sky Stream Cliff was still peaceful. She slowly smiled and said in a deep voice, "Let's do it." Yes. Not long after, the fire on the mountain stream cliff soared into the sky. The originally tranquil place gradually became noisy. "General, look." Lu Jingxian, who had just walked out of the tent, turned back to look. His heart sank when he saw the blazing flames rising from Jian Tian Cliff. He thought that he knew where Princess Ding had gone. "General, is there a sneak attack on Jian Tian Cliff?" "Damn it, how did they get there?" There was a lot of noise before the battle. Lu Jingxian frowned and said in a deep voice, "Shut up. Deputy General, guard this place. I will lead the troops back to reinforce." Because he did not know how many people the enemy had on Jiantian Cliff, Lu Jingxian did not want to take the risk. He could only lead the troops back to reinforce. He had more than 30,000 men and only 6,000 to 7,000 were left on Jiantian Cliff. Once Jiantian Cliff was lost, it would be meaningless for them to stay here. No one dared to argue. They quickly responded and mobilized their own troops. Zhang Qilan, who was at the foot of the hill, also saw the flames in the distance. Of course, it was not the flames on Jiantian Cliff. It was a signal sent by Yi Li. A smile finally appeared on his calm and resolute face. He shouted, "Beat the drums." Before dawn, the sound of drums shook the sky in the dark night. Amidst the battle cries, the soldiers rushed up the hill like a tide. Lu Jingxian, who was rushing back on his horse, also heard the battle cries behind him. A helpless smile appeared on his face. The prince's reminder was too late. He was careless. Jiantian Cliff was also in chaos. The soldiers who were still asleep hurriedly got up to face the enemy. Naturally, they were not a match for the soldiers who were holding their breath and waiting to attack. Moreover, these people did not have the intention to fight to the death with them. They just lit a fire and ran. If they met the enemy, they would fight if they could. If they could not fight, they would run. The soldiers who were woken up from their sleep were furious. However, they were not as smart as the enemy. They could only fight mindlessly in the chaos. At a high place not far from the battlefield, they could see the battlefield clearly with the help of the light from the fire. Feng Zhiyao stood beside Yi Li. He smiled and looked at the soldiers who were fighting hard below. He said with a smile, "These guys are not bad. It would be great if they could be this brave on the battlefield." This time, not only were the grassroots generals and young people participating in the drill, even the ordinary soldiers were mostly newcomers who had just joined the Maoist army in recent years. Although the former Maoist army veterans could not be said to have experienced hundreds of battles, most of them had been on the battlefield several times. This kind of drill was not as important to them as the new soldiers. Under the light of the fire, some of the soldiers were still fighting with swords and spears. Some had simply rolled on the ground and hugged each other to fight. Some even used tricks such as choking, biting ears, and so on. No wonder young Master Feng San, who always paid attention to his demeanor on the battlefield, was so happy that he laughed. Yi Li looked down calmly and said lightly, "At least they can be a little familiar with it. In the future, they will not panic on the battlefield. The ones who die the quickest on the battlefield are always the new soldiers." Feng Zhiyao stopped laughing and nodded. He said, "Wang Fei is right. General Lu has returned." A strange howl came from the night sky. Feng Zhiyao's expression became serious as he said solemnly. Yi Li nodded and looked at the sky. She said, "It's late. Let's retreat." Feng Zhiyao frowned and said, "But General Zhang." Yi Li said, "Lu Jingxian will probably call back at least half of his men. If General Zhang still can't attack, then we can't do anything. When General Lu's people arrive, we won't be able to leave. Let's go up the mountain." Feng Zhiyao was helpless. He knew that Yi Li was speaking the truth. He could only give the signal to retreat. The young soldiers who had been fighting excitedly were forcefully called back. They were all restless like little ponies. When Lu Jingxian rushed back to the main camp on Jiantian Cliff, the sky had already brightened. The originally neat and tidy camp now looked like it had been burned by fire and ravaged by bandits. Looking at the large groups of dead soldiers sitting in the center of the camp, LV Jingxian, who had not slept for the entire night, looked even worse. "Who's your general? How many people are there?" Lu Jingxian asked in a deep voice as he stared at a soldier of the East Army who was chatting among his own soldiers. The soldier stared blankly for a moment before quickly replying, reporting to the general, "This lowly one has already died in battle." The dead could not speak. Lu Jingxian's face couldn't help but twist. He gave a cold snort and left. The soldier frowned with worry. His face was full of confusion. He didn't say anything to make General Lu angry, right? On the mountain slope 20 li away, there was a fierce battle for position. However, the defending army, which had suddenly lost half of its men, was gradually showing signs of decline. On Jiantian Cliff, it was a different scene. The East Army would come and besiege them from time to time. When they were beaten back by the West Army, they would not continue to harass them. They would retreat and rest before coming back to continue the battle. If they were on the plains, this kind of provocation would be seeking their own deaths. "Young Master Feng, you and I would have become General Lu's captives." Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and complained, "Why didn't Wang Fei let Qi Lin participate in the battle?" Yi Li smiled at him and said, "This is a drill. If we use cheats in a drill, we might as well act." Cheats? What was that? Chapter 565. By the time Zhang Qilan brought his army to meet up with Yi Li and Feng Zhiyao, it would be another tough battle. However, it was better than what they had expected. At the very least, they were at the top of the cliff and not being suppressed by someone from a higher ground. Furthermore, Lu Jingxian's 30,000 men had already lost more than half of their numbers. However, they had lost less than 10% of their own men. Thinking of this, Zhang Qilan couldn't help but want to laugh out loud. Outside a small city several kilometers away, Mo Xiuyao sighed helplessly as he stood outside the camp and looked at the small city that was isolated and had its gates tightly shut. Yun Ting and Qin Yun beside him looked at the prince strangely, not understanding why the prince sighed. In the end, Yun Ting couldn't hold back his words and couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, is there something troubling you?" Mo Xiuyao shook his head and said, "I'm afraid Lu Jingxian won't be able to hold on for much longer." Not knowing Yun Ting, even the usually calm Qin Yun didn't believe it. He frowned and said, "The cliff is a dangerous place. Even if General Zhang has 100,000 men, he won't be able to do anything." "Why is Prince?" Mo Xiuyao handed the battle report to Qin Yun and said, "Ever since Zhang Qilan arrived, Li and Feng San have not appeared. I'm afraid that the two of them have taken a detour behind Lu Jingxian. If that's the case, Lu Jingxian's defense in the first 20 li of the cliff will be useless. Once the two armies reach the cliff, even if Zhang Qilan's 100,000 men can't do anything, they can take turns to grind Lu Jingxian's 10 to 20,000 men to death." Hearing Mo Xiuyao's words, Qin Yun and Yun Ting's expressions changed. Yun Ting said, "Prince, I'm willing to go and reinforce General Lu." Mo Xiuyao looked at him and said indifferently, "Reinforce? Where are we going to get reinforcements? What's more, even if I give you 10 or 20,000 men, what can they do in front of an army of 100,000? Yun Ting was speechless. Then what should we do?" Mo Xiuyao turned his gaze to the isolated city in front of them and said in a low voice, "Attack the city with full force. We must take down this city before Zhang Qilan's men arrive." Chen Yun and Yun Ting's expressions were solemn as they stood up and said, "This subordinate obeys." Although Mo Xiuyao said that he would attack the city with all his might, this small city was not that easy to take down. Yuan Pei was a veteran of the Maoist army and was especially good at defending cities. In a situation where Mo Xiuyao didn't have the advantage in numbers, as long as Yuan Pei didn't care about anything else and waited for reinforcements, Mo Xiuyao wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Even if Mo Xiuyao had 1,000 plans, Yuan Pei was as steady as a mountain and didn't care about anything. Even if Yun Ting and the others cursed at him every day, the people on the city walls didn't open the city gates and couldn't do anything about it. On the cliff of Jiantian, the two armies faced off for 4 to 5 days before they finally wiped out Lu Jingxian's 10,000 men. Lu Jingxian was personally captured by Zhang Qilan. The two of them had worked together for more than 10 years and had often fought with each other. Although he lost to Zhang Qilan this time, Lu Jingxian didn't feel ashamed. Seeing his subordinates completely annihilated, LV Jingxian, who was exhausted from the battle, threw away his weapon and said to Zhang Qilan, who was extremely proud of himself, "I lost." Zhang Qilan pulled him up with a face full of smiles and chuckled. Victory and defeat are common in battle. Don't take it to heart. Lu Jingxian snorted softly and said, "You definitely couldn't have broken through my defenses so quickly. Where is Wang Fei?" The young generals watching stilled. The Prince Ding mansion still had a former Princess Wang Fei because she was unwilling to leave the Dechu state. Mo Xiuyao had ordered Leng Haoyu to protect her in secret. But in the minds of the Maoist army, there was only one Wang Fei right now. But how come they didn't know that the Wang Fei was in their army? Everyone's gaze looked at Zhang Qilan. Who told him to be the main general? If even he didn't know the whereabouts of the Wang Fei, then no one else would. Zhang Qilan laughed dryly and looked at Yi Li, who had come with Feng Zhiyao. Lu Jingxian stilled and didn't recognize Yi Li. But he was very familiar with Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who were following behind Yi Li. It was clear who it was that both Qin Feng and Wei Lin were following at the same time. When he looked closely at Yi Li, who was standing next to Feng Zhiyao, he immediately felt that it was the Wang Fei. This subordinate greets Wang Fei. Lu Jingxian went forward and bowed. Yi Li grimaced helplessly. Looking at the petrified crowd in front of her, she said, "General Lu, rise." Lu Jingxian raised his hands in a bow and said with a smile, "This one accepts defeat at Wang Fei's hands." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "General overpraises." Yi Li just did her best. Lu Jingxian didn't care. In any case, he definitely wouldn't admit that he had lost to Zhang Qilan, at least not to his face. This one doesn't have anything else to do, so this one will take his people and leave first. I wish Wang Fei a safe journey. Yi Li nodded and said, "Many thanks for General's auspicious words." Seeing Lu Jingxian leave confidently with the soldiers who had been declared dead, the remaining people were silent. Was it really all right to wish the main general of the enemy a safe journey? After passing through Jiantian Cliff, even though the road behind them wasn't flat, it was still very calm. They didn't dare to delay at all. The group of people sprinted towards the isolated city to help Yuan Pei. At this time, on the walls of the small isolated city, Mo Xiuyao was dressed in white. He wasn't even wearing his battle robes. He looked at the old General Yuan Pei and said with a smile, "Old General, this time I won." The white-haired General Yuan Pei looked at the man in front of him, whose hair was as white as snow but still as proud as the wind. A thread of relief and joy flashed through his eyes. He nodded and said, "It is true that Prince has won. This old man admits defeat." In terms of military strength, Mo Xiuyao was only slightly better than Yuan Pei. Attacking a city was much harder than defending it. Back then, Shiling's army of more than 100,000 had not been able to break through a small city in Jiangxia. Now, Prince Ding had broken through in a few short days. This was his ability. Yuan Pei was not a person who refused to admit defeat because of old age. He felt very gratified that the Ding King's household had a successor. If this was a real battlefield, would not have been able to take this city so easily. This isolated city was truly isolated because it was a newly built city. There hadn't even been time for residents to move in. And on a battlefield, there wouldn't be a city that had basically nothing. Yuan Pei laughed loudly and said, "Many thanks to Prince. But if this was a real battlefield, Prince wouldn't have only brought a few tens of thousands of troops to attack a city, right?" The two looked at each other and smiled. Clearly, they were in a good mood. Reporting to Prince, "There are troops coming this way." A soldier on the city wall rushed over to report. Oh. Mo Xiaoyao looked over. In the distance, there was indeed the sound of hooves and dust rising. In less than an hour, Yili, Feng Xiao, and Zhang Qilan had already led their troops to the city. Mo Xiaoyao looked around and saw at least 80 to 90,000 troops. He couldn't help but praise, to be able to wipe out Lu Jinxian's troops with less than 20,000 losses. That's not bad. Looking down at the people below, he smiled faintly and said, "General Zhang, Feng San, Li, you've come too late." Feng Zhiyao gritted his teeth in regret. Looking at the situation, if they had come 2 to 4 hours earlier, the situation would have been very different. Unfortunately, on the battlefield, the difference of half an hour could often completely change the outcome of a battle. Princess. Chapter 566. Yili raised her head to look at the man in white on the city wall. Her lips slowly curved into a faint smile. She raised her right hand slightly. Her soft voice spread across the entire battlefield, "Attack." On the city gate tower, Mo Xiaoyao looked helplessly at the army that was preparing to attack the city. Yuan Pei, who was standing at the side, couldn't help but laugh. He looked at Mo Xiaoyao with a smile and said, "Your Highness, it seems that this battle isn't over yet." Mo Xiaoyao smiled bitterly, "Old General is right. I celebrated too early." According to the rules of the drill would end when the city was breached. They had one. But since it was a drill, they had to train the new soldiers as much as possible. Furthermore, there was no rule on the battlefield that said a city couldn't be taken back after it was breached. As a result, the curtain was raised on a large-scale siege battle once again. This time, the siege was even more difficult than Mo Xiaoyao's previous siege. The two sides fought for 7 days without a victor being decided. In the end, they could only announce a draw. This was because Mo Xiaoyao's city had no more rations. This was a completely isolated city. Even though there were no civilians who needed extra rations, it also meant that there was no other food in the city other than the rations they brought with them. As for Yuan Pei, he had already destroyed the food that originally belonged to the defenders on the day the city was breached. Not only did Mo Xiaoyao's subordinates suffer heavy losses, they even had no food to eat and could only defend the city with empty stomachs. The soldiers outside the city weren't doing any better. In a moment of carelessness, Mo Xiaoyao's men destroyed most of their rations. In the end, neither side was willing to admit defeat. Seeing that they were about to run out of energy, old General Yuan Pei could only call for a halt. In the end, the two sides agreed to a draw. When Prince Ding and Princess Ding announced the end of the drill, many soldiers couldn't help but cry tears of joy. Of course, this wasn't because they thought they had won. It was because they could finally eat. Obviously, there was a large amount of food and fodder piled up outside the city, but they had to watch their dead brothers eat and drink well while lying to themselves that they had run out of food. These days were 10 times, 100 times worse than when they ran out of food. As soon as the drill was over, no one cared about anything else. They set up camp on the spot, buried pots, and cooked rice. The soldiers who had been fighting fiercely just now were all on good terms with each other. Especially when he saw that the other party's eyes were also green from hunger, a special kind of comrade in arms spontaneously arose in his heart. In the small city, the generals who had just finished eating and drinking also gathered together. Because the siege had lasted for too long, even Lu Jingxian, who had already returned, came back to watch the battle. Now that the battle was over, both sides had their own victories and defeats. No one had lost face, so the atmosphere was still harmonious. But the young generals of the Eastern Army that had been with Yi Li looked at Yi Li, who was still dressed in white, and their eyes were still dazed. A few days ago, they had been so busy with the battle that they didn't have the mind to care. Now that the battle was over, the young men finally remembered that the white-clothed young master that they had intentionally or unintentionally pushed aside and made them promise General Lu was the Wang Fei that they had always respected. This strong impact made the group of young men feel uncomfortable. Wang Fei. The young men pushed each other and finally pushed out an unlucky person, Wang Fei. This subordinate was blind before and offended Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please punish us. Zhang Qilan glanced at the incompetent juniors and said, "You brats still have the face to say this? This old man had repeatedly told you to be polite to Wang Fei. What did you do?" Everyone stared at him silently. "You were talking about Mr. Chu and not Wang Fei." Seeing the aggrieved gazes of the young people, Zhang Qilan was silent. He snickered and looked at Yi Li, saying that Wang Fei, this subordinate, did not explain this to them clearly. "Wang Fei, please do not take offense." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "General Zhang is too serious. This was originally my intention. Also, it is hard for young people to not be young and impetuous. General Zhang and the other generals have taught well. These young generals are all good seedlings." Being praised by Wang Fei, everyone felt their lips twitch. They were young, but compared to Wang Fei, who was just 21 or 22 years old, most of them were older. Being called young and impetuous by Wang Fei, they couldn't help but blush. On the side, Yunting was complaining inside, "What are you all doing? When you met Wang Fei was only 15 or 16 years old." With Yi Li's praise, the other generals also revealed smiles on their faces. Even though these young people were following Zhang Qilan this time, they were not all Zhang Qilan's subordinates. Among them were Lu Jingxian, Yuan Pei, and even Sun Yan's subordinates who were stationed at Feihong Pass. They were all elites of the young generation. When they were praised as their superiors, the generals felt they had face. Hearing Wang Fei say that she would not blame them, the young people all sighed in relief. The young people were very curious. Even though they were far away, they thought that they were secretly examining Wang Fei. After all, they had heard of Princess Ding's deeds before they had entered the Mahist army. Who would have thought that there would be a day when they would be able to see and even fight side by side with Princess Ding? But they did not know that their actions, which they thought were secretive, had already caused someone to be displeased. So much so that when they returned to the army, before they could even breathe properly, they were thrown into some training camp for 2 or 3 months. They could only think of it as the generals being dissatisfied with their performance in the drill. After the drill ended, Zhang Qilan and Lu Jingxian were left to clean up. Mo Xiuyao took Yi Li, Feng Zhiyao, and the others back to Li City. She had just returned to Ding Wangfu and had yet to enter the study when she met young Master Qing Qin, who was walking towards her. She only needed to look at his expression to know that young Master Qing Qin was very dissatisfied with a certain irresponsible Wang Yi who had thrown the affairs of the Northwest to him. Her gaze calmly swept over Mo Xiuyao, who looked better than usual after half a month of marching and fighting. Su Qingchen asked faintly, it seems that Prince has been well these days. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said in a good mood, I haven't moved for many years. It's good to move around. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. What? Then congratulations to Prince. In the future, Prince will be able to move around more often. What did she mean? Mo Xiaoyao looked at Su Qingchen in confusion. Su Qingchen sighed and waved the battle report she had just received. The Dechu State's army has been losing battles in the north. In less than a month, they have already lost 4 cities to the north. Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment. He raised his head and smiled faintly at Su Qingchen. This has nothing to do with us. The Mahist army and the Dechu state had already broken off all ties. How the Dechu state fought had nothing to do with them. Su Qingchen nodded and said faintly, as long as Prince knows what to do, it's fine. In addition, the northern tribes have sent news. The northern tribes are also restless. Once the Dechu state is unfavorable to the war in the north, the northern tribes will definitely invade the south next spring. As Mo Xiaoyao listened to Su Qingchen's words, he continued to walk toward the study. He asked, what news is there from Nanzhao? Su Qingchen said, the heir of Genom of Gojoseon has led an army of 300,000 and is already stationed at the Nanzhao border. The 2 countries are in a standoff. It is unknown when the war will begin. Will the war begin? Mo Xiaoyao turned back and asked. Su Qingchen was silent for a moment. She replied in a low voice, yes. Mo Xiaoyao paused and said, good. Once the war begins, the Shilling will not have time to attend to anything else for a while. Following behind him, Feng Zhiyao frowned and asked, Prince, shouldn't we also prepare? Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment and nodded. After the war between Nanzhao and the Shilling begins, issue a conscription order in the northwest. Feng Zhiyao agreed. Su Qingchen received Mo Xiaoyao's gaze and shook her head. I don't understand military matters. You guys do as you see fit. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said to Feng Zhiyao, go prepare. After the Prince Ding Mansion took control of the northwest, the conscription system had been reformed many times. It was somewhat different from the current military service system. All youths in the northwest who had reached the age of 18 had to serve 2 years of military service. After 2 years, they would be stripped of their armor and returned to the fields. But after that, they still had to undergo military training for a month every year. Most importantly, these 2 years of military service were not limited to ordinary people. Merchants and even scholars had to participate. But scholars could reduce it to 1 year. So now, all the students of Lishan Academy who had reached the age of 18 had already served military service. In addition, the Mahist army had a standing army of 900,000. The soldiers in these armies had all served for more than 5 years, and all of them would serve for 30 years or even longer. They were the true fighting force of the Northwest. Also, they were different from the 2-year conscripts who had no pay and were different from most of the soldiers of other countries who had no pay. They received a certain amount of pay every month and a certain amount of pension if they died in battle. Although the Prince Ding Mansion created a certain amount of financial pressure, it also fought for the Mahist army's fighting strength and cohesion. Compared to the millions of soldiers of the other 3 countries, the Mahist army's 900,000 soldiers were not enough. But once a war really broke out and the conscription order was issued, the Prince Ding Mansion could instantly organize an army of over 1 million properly trained soldiers. Although their fighting strength could not compare to the real Mahist army, it was definitely not something that some soldiers who had just been pulled into the army and entered the battlefield could compare to. At the very least, they had been trained by the generals of the real Mahist army. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's departing figure, Feng Zhiyao sighed and looked up at the sky. Once Nanzhao and Shilin went to war, the northern tribes would definitely get a share of the Dechu state. And the Prince Ding mansion would definitely not be able to stay out of this. After so many years of preparation, was it finally about to begin? Chapter 567. War wasn't something that could be started immediately. Although there were signs of war outside the Northwest region, the people in the Northwest region were still living their lives peacefully and warmly. Because they believed that no matter what happened, as long as the Mahist army was there, the flames of war would not ignite in their homeland. As for the officials and generals in the Prince Ding mansion, they were well aware that the peace in front of them would not last for long. They all secretly rubbed their palms together in preparation. In the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao did not seem to be worried about the situation outside. After the military exercise ended, he rewarded the soldiers who deserved to be rewarded and threw the people who needed to be fixed elsewhere. Then, he returned to the Prince Ding mansion to be a peaceful prince. Every day, other than dealing with political matters, he would pester Yili to bully Mo Xiaobao. He was extremely carefree. Today, Mo Xiaobao, who had been given a rare day off by Mr. Qingyun, was once again bullied by his unscrupulous father. His eyes were wet as he looked at his mother with grievance. Yili could not help but sigh helplessly. This father and son seemed to be unable to interact peacefully for more than 2 hours. Mo Xiaobao was still young and did not have enough fighting strength. He could only be bullied without any strength to retaliate. If it was a normal person, they would probably stay as far away as possible from Mo Xiaoyao. However, Mo Xiaobao had to face difficulties. When there were no difficulties, he would create difficulties for himself. He was defeated time and time again. Seeing Mo Xiaobao pretending to be pitiful, the unscrupulous father sitting on the couch snorted in disdain. Pretending to be pitiful. Those were all leftovers from I. Of course, Prince Ding would never admit that at that time, because compared to Mo Xiaobao's round, white, tender, and innocent appearance, the effect of him pretending to be pitiful was greatly reduced. Furthermore, was it appropriate for a father to compete with his son in pretending to be pitiful? It was too undignified. Thus, Prince Ding firmly rejected this option. Speaking of which, Prince, as a father, it wasn't appropriate for him to bully a 5-year-old child just because he was older than his son, right? As for what happened afterwards, Mo Xiaoyao learned the art of acting pitiful on his own. In the end, he evolved into a little white cat who pretended to be a pig to eat a tiger. He looked pure on the outside, but he was incomparably scheming on the inside. This really made Mo Xiaoyao's stomach ache for a while. This was not something he could have predicted. Yili bent over and picked up her tearful son. She gently rubbed his little head and said, "Be good, Xiaobao. Mother will take you out to play. Let's not play with father anymore." Mo Xiaobao immediately reaches out his hands to hug Yili's neck, his smile incomparably brilliant. "Nyangqin is the best, Xiaobao loves Nyangqin the most." Yili was speechless. She knew that this brat was just pretending. However, not many people could stand that pitiful look even if it was just an act. Sometimes, Yili couldn't help but think, in the end, who did this child's temperament resemble? She and Mo Xiaoyao were not people who would reveal their emotions in front of others. Although Mo Xiaoyao loved to put on an act from time to time, Yili bet that when Mo Xiaoyao was a child, he definitely didn't reach the stage where he could cry whenever he wanted to. If this lively temperament was somewhat similar to Su Qingyan, but when Su Qingyan was 5 years old, his mind might not even be as sharp as Mo Xiaobao's little finger. "Xiaobao, come down. Father has something to say to you." On the soft couch, Missouri Xiaoyao slightly squints his eyes, smiling incomparably amiably as he beckons to Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao's intuition was not good. He tightly hugs Yili's neck and repeatedly shakes his head. He simply buries his little face into Yili's neck. Mo Xiaoyao didn't get angry. He chuckles and says, "You really don't want to listen. You won't regret it." If you regret it in the future, don't say that this father doesn't love you and didn't remind you. Mo Xiaobao secretly perks up his ears. Incomparably conflicted, he secretly turns his head to look at Mo Xiaoyao, who is still lying on the soft couch with his eyes closed. He only hears Mo Xiaoyao mutter to himself, "Speaking of which, in the past, your father, I, almost grew up to look like Zhang Qilan. If it wasn't for your grandfather, my father, who reminded me, our Prince Ding Mansion's handsome appearance would have been cut off." Mo Xiaobao's face pales. Grow up to look like General Zhang. Zhang Qilan's appearance appeared in his mind. Mo Xiaobao repeatedly shakes his head to dispel this frightening image. It wasn't that Zhang Qilan's appearance was unpresentable. General Zhang's facial features were good and his figure was tall and imposing. No matter where he was placed, he would not be able to escape the praise of having a dignified appearance. But Mo Xiaobao's requirements for himself were exceptionally high. Even if he couldn't grow up to look like eldest uncle, there was still Feng San, Han Mingxi, or his father to choose from. General Zhang's appearance really didn't fit Mo Xiaobao classmates' aesthetic standards. Thus, for the sake of his future beauty, Mo Xiaobao kicks his little feet to make Yili put him down. He stands vigilantly in front of Mo Xiaoyao. After waiting for a while, Mo Xiaoyao lazily opens his eyes. He glances at Mo Xiaobao from the corner of his eyes for a long while before slowly reaching out to pinch Mo Xiaobao's round little face. Pinch. 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 Mo Xiaobao angrily glares at his father and whimpers. Although it doesn't hurt too much, it means that he once again lost to this man in front of his mother. Mo Xiaoyao sits up and moves closer to Mo Xiaobao to carefully examine the little face that is red from his pinch. He gives a sinister smile. "Do you know that you are very fat? You still dare to ask your mother to hug you? There will be a day when your mother will be tired out by a little fatty like you. Look at how chubby you are, you still dare to eat meat every day. Your father was not even half as fat as you when I was 5 years old. Tell me, when you grow up, will you be even fatter than Zhang Qilan? I think you don't need to be called Mo Xiaobao anymore. How about changing your name to Mo de Fatty?" Hearing this, Mo Xiaobao lowers his head to look at his round, white, and tender little hands. His fragile little heart is finally shattered by his own imagination. He looks at Mo Xiaoyao with grief and indignation before running away in tears. "Whoa. Eldest uncle, father bullies me, Xiaoyao." Yili frowns, indifferently looking at the man who is lying on the soft couch laughing to the point of convulsing back and forth. How can you talk to a child like that? It's easy to hurt a child's self-esteem. Moreover, Mo Xiaobao is not as exaggerated as he says. It's just that his grandfather, Qing Yun, who loves him dearly, raised him too well. He looks slightly stronger than other children. It's a good thing for children to be a little chubbier. Mo Xiaoyao humps, "I'm doing it for his own good. It's about time for him to officially start practicing martial arts. If he grows too fat, the one suffering is himself. When he comes back in the future, Li will make more vegetarian dishes." Yili facepalms. After all is said and done, it's still because she personally made all the meat dishes that her son likes last night. She slightly neglected a certain someone. Who told Mo Xiaobao to not be happy without meat, while Mo Xiaoyao prefers vegetarian dishes? When Xiaobao comes back to the academy, I'll personally make your favorite dishes, okay? Yili says. Compared to those wives who wash their hands and make soup for their husbands, Yili rarely cooks. Mo Xiaoyao nods in satisfaction and says, "Only for me." Yili nods and warns, "You're not allowed to bully Xiaobao." Mo Xiaoyao waves his hand and says, "Don't worry, that brat's zodiac sign is a cockroach." After a while, he'll happily run back by himself. Yili is speechless. Her watery eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness. She reaches out and pinches his waist. Meeting Mo Xiaoyao's puzzled gaze, Yili smiles sinisterly. If Xiaobao's zodiac sign is a cockroach, then what's your zodiac sign? Chapter 568. Sure enough, in less than half an hour, student Mo Xiaobao happily appears in front of Yili, bashfully looking at Yili. He wants to say something but hesitates. Yili holds back her laughter, looking at her son and asks, "What does Xiaobao want to say?" Mo Xiaobao shyly says, "Uncle said, even if Xiaobao really grows up to be like General Zhang, even if the whole world dislikes Xiaobao, mother will not dislike Xiaobao." Yili secretly glares at Mo Xiaoyao and says with a smile, "Of course, no matter what Xiaobao becomes, he will always be mother's darling. In this world, there is no mother who will dislike her own child." Mo Xiaobao's eyes light up, firmly nodding his head. "Child knows, child won't eat meat in the future." Yili touches her son's little face and says, "Of course you still have to eat meat, but you still have to eat some meat and vegetables. You can't be picky like yesterday, do you understand?" Child knows. Then. Student Xiaobao is shy. Can mother still hug Xiaobao? Mo Xiaoyao has a toothache. In the end, who did this scoundrel learn from? From ancient times until now, his Prince Ding mansion has never had such a strange breed. Was that bashful look really acceptable? Su Qingqin. It's definitely him who taught Mo Xiaobao bad things. You just wait for me. Yili smiles. Of course you can. Mo Xiaobao solemnly nods his head. Xiaobao has grown up. I don't need mother to hug me. Xiaobao can hug mother. But right now, Xiaobao is still small. Let mother hug. He is really too considerate and filial. Yili's heart is as soft as the clouds in the sky. She bends over and hugs Mo Xiaobao to sit on her lap, lowering her head to kiss him. Mother will remember Xiaobao's words. Originally, she said she would take Mo Xiaobao out to play, but behind them, there is a Prince Ding who doesn't do his job and wants to follow them in the name of protecting his wife and child. In the carriage, Mo Xiaobao lies on his mother's lap, representing his uncle to despise his father. Mo Xiaoyao didn't mind at all. He raised his eyebrows and laughed. Kid, what do you know? This was called making the best use of people and things. It could also be said that he knew how to make good use of people. Since your uncle and uncle are so powerful, why should I work myself to death to deal with those chores? I, your father, am the most powerful person in the Northwest. I only need to set a direction and goal. Naturally, there will be countless people working hard to achieve this goal. Slacking off. Uncle said that an emperor who is lazy and ignores the affairs of the court is an incapable ruler. Therefore, a prince who is lazy and ignores the affairs of the court is also an incapable ruler. The little white bun sat on Yili's knees and seriously discussed the issue of diligent government. Please say that I have managed my subordinates well, thank you, Mo Xiaoyao said lazily, looking at his son who was trying to argue with reason. Silly boy, you don't even know that you've been tricked by your uncle. He's clearly afraid that you'll be like your father and not do anything when you grow up and implicate him. However, your father won't let you become like me, because I'm still waiting for you to take over my position when you grow up. At that time, I will take Miss Lee and fly far away. Hug my wife, dream on. The little bun who didn't know that after being tricked by his father, he was tricked by his uncle opened his eyes wide. Of course not. Uncle said that diligent government makes a good emperor. Everything his uncle said was right. Thank you for the reminder, but your father, I am not an emperor. Mo Xiaoyao said with waning interest. Although he had learned many things, the 5-year-old little bun still didn't completely understand the difference between a prince and an emperor. Moreover, in the northwest, the difference between an emperor and a prince wasn't that big. Classmate Mo Xiaobao's understanding was that there were many princes in other places, so princes had to listen to the emperor. However, there was only one prince in the northwest, his father, and he didn't have to listen to the emperor. Therefore, his father, this prince, was one of a kind and was also the greatest prince in the world. What was so great about being an emperor? Xiling had one, the Chu state had one, and northern Rong and southern Zhao had one each. The more emperors there were, the less valuable they were. However, there was only one Prince Ding. If he wanted to be one, he had to be the most unique and most valuable one. Mo Xiaobao's strange concept directly caused the establishment of an empire to be delayed by many, many years. Unable to out-talk his father, Mo Xiaobao proudly turned his head and fell into his mother's embrace. Mo Xiaoyao ignored him and looked at him with a smile. Son, your great-grandfather must have told you many history books. In history, there were emperors who went to court every 10 days to half a month and still had the country prospering. There were also emperors who woke up in the middle of the night and still had their country destroyed. Therefore, whether an emperor is good or bad has nothing to do with whether you are diligent or not. Mo Xiaobao thought about it and crawled out of his mother's embrace. He nodded and said, I know, it also has to do with being smart. The idiot that father mentioned who woke up in the middle of the night was the idiot emperor of the Chu state. After saying this, Mo Xiaobao nodded heavily to confirm his own thoughts. Seeing him so serious, Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but laugh. He said with a smile, how do you know it's that idiot? His country hasn't been destroyed yet. Mo Jingqi did wake up in the middle of the night and sleep in the middle of the night, but it wasn't necessarily because he was diligent. Mo Xiaoyao felt that it was more because he was guarding against this and that and couldn't sleep. Mo Xiaobao said seriously, of course he's an idiot. He chased father away, he also chased granduncle and uncle away. He also likes the worst Prime Minister Lu's family and doesn't like Wu Jijia's mother. Even his own mother and younger brother don't like him. Wu Jijia also doesn't like him. Eldest uncle says this is called destroying the Great Wall. Feng San says this is called asking for death. Yili, who originally found it interesting, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What kind of nonsense did he learn? Along the way, they chatted and laughed. Time passed quickly and unknowingly, it was already noon. The horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of a mountain. After getting off the carriage, they had to walk the rest of the way. Mo Xiaoyao naturally couldn't let Yili carry Mo Xiaobao, who was about to become fat for such a long distance, so he could only carry him himself. Mo Xiaobao didn't feel uncomfortable in his father's arms at all. He calmly laid down and curiously looked at everything in front of him while asking, Mother, where are we going? Yili faintly smiled and said, You'll know when we get there. Actually, the father and son's relationship wasn't that bad. Although they usually quarreled, it could be seen that Mo Xiaobao didn't have any grudges against his unkind father. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so happy lying in his father's arms. The group walked into the mountain. In less than 5 li, the road gradually became more heavily guarded. The deeper they went, the stricter the security became. Along the way, the guards all bowed to the two. Until they were stopped at a checkpoint. Token, password. Mo Xiaoyao knew this place before, but because he gave full authority to Yili, he didn't really come here. Hearing this, he couldn't help being surprised. With a smile, he said, I also need a token and password. The guards at the checkpoint didn't move at all. Token, password. Mo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow as he looked at Yili. With his sharp senses, he could naturally feel that there were at least several hundred arrows pointing in their direction. If there wasn't a token and password, Mo Xiaoyao didn't doubt that these soldiers would really shoot arrows. Yili took out a very unique-looking token and handed it over to the soldier. Soldier's spirit, return the token. The soldier looked at the token and confirmed its authenticity before returning it to her. Wu Wei, I'm not afraid. Princess, please come in. After entering, they passed through 3 or 4 similar checkpoints on the way. The password for each checkpoint was completely different. Adding on the advantage of the terrain and this kind of defense, even Mo Xiuyao didn't have the confidence to say that they could enter unharmed. Li, I'm really more and more curious about what is inside. This mysterious place wasn't far from Glass City, but no one would have thought that this originally unremarkable place was the true tomb of the previous dynasty's great ancestor, or rather, the location of the treasure. This tomb wasn't as grand as a normal emperor's tomb. It couldn't even be compared to the empty tomb near Hong Province. It could barely be considered a huge underground palace built in the mountains. There were no beautiful marble decorations, no gold, silver, jewels, or rare treasures. It was just like an ordinary underground palace. If people came in looking for treasures, they would definitely be disappointed. And now, there were already a lot of people busily walking in and out of this place. Mo Xiuyao curiously looked at these people busily making some strange metal tools. Especially in the innermost area, many people were gathered together to study a hollow copper pillar that was as thick as a person. Even though he didn't know what it was, but looking at the hollow copper pillar, for some reason, Mo Xiuyao intuitively felt a trace of danger. Calmly moving away from the hole in the copper pillar, Mo Xiuyao turned to look at Yili and raised his brows. Li, this is the thing left behind by the previous dynasty's great ancestor. To be honest, I really don't understand what this thing is. Yili looked at him and softly sighed. Actually, I also don't understand whether this is good or not. When she first came here and saw the thing left behind by the previous dynasty's great ancestor, she was shocked. At the same time, she was a bit hesitant. Without natural development, was it really good to let the cold weapon era enter the hot weapon era? Presumably, that senior was also hesitant, so this place had never been truly used. Therefore, in the history of the previous dynasty, she had never seen anything that shouldn't have appeared in this era. Then, does Li understand now? Mo Xiuyao asked with a smile. Yili smiled faintly. Let nature take its course. Chapter 569. Yes, let nature take its course. If Yili had not been reborn into this era that she was completely unfamiliar with, but into a dynasty in history, she would not have hesitated. She would definitely take out these things without any hesitation. So what if she pushed forward the course of history? It would not be worse than the original history. Right now, Yili did not hesitate for long. She was not a person that liked to be conflicted. It was just that no matter if it was Emperor Gaozu of the previous dynasty or herself, they did not have much understanding of the military industry. She didn't know the original identity of the previous dynasty's great ancestor, but even if Yili knew the structure of all the most advanced weapons in the world like the back of her hand, it didn't mean that she could create the exact same weapon. Needless to say, he couldn't solve the problem of materials alone. Therefore, Yili did not treat this place as a place where weapons of mass destruction could be mass-produced on the battlefield. Instead, she used the most basic knowledge that the skilled craftsmen of this era could understand to give them a completely different concept from the current era. Yili did not need them to immediately create an AK-47 or long-range missile. They only needed to work hard in this direction. No matter if it was 100 years or 100 years, Yili believed that with these seeds, this land would not encounter what her hometown had experienced in the future. Wang Fei. A middle-aged man walked over. When he saw Yili, his eyes lit up and he rushed over with a fanatical expression. Mo Xiuyao held Mo Xiaobao as he coldly stared at the charging man. He narrowed his eyes in displeasure and stepped in front of Yili. The charging man stopped in his tracks. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's gloomy expression, he knew that his actions just now had been rude. He could only awkwardly stand there, not knowing what to do. Yili walked out from behind Mo Xiaoyao and said with a faint smile, "Masterly, what is it?" The middle-aged man quickly said, "We have made the things Wang Fei gave us, but there are some questions we want to ask Wang Fei." Yili nodded and said, "Then let's go take a look together." Placed in front of Yili and Mo Xiaoyao was a pistol. Mo Xiaoyao was naturally unfamiliar with the things in front of him, but Yili's eyes flashed with a trace of nostalgia and joy. She walked up and picked up the gun on the table. To be honest, Yili had seen all sorts of advanced weaponry in her previous life. The gun in front of her was so crude that it was unbearable to look at. Compared to the earliest automatic handguns in the world in his previous life, it was much cruder. However, it only took them 5 years to go through the hundreds of years of evolution in the history of firearms. Yili believed that these skilled craftsmen had done their best to create such a weapon. Picking up the pistol, Yili turned around and smiled at Xiaobao. "Xiaobao, cover your ears." Mo Xiaobao looked curiously at the thing in his mother's hand, but he still obediently covered his ears with his little hands. The pistol spun in Yili's hand. Yili's eyes changed as she raised the gun and fired 3 shots at the target not far away. After the 3 loud bangs, Yili looked at the target in front of her and slightly frowned. The first shot had hit the bullseye, the second shot had only hit the 4th ring, and the 3rd shot had missed. Of course, this was not a problem with Yili's marksmanship. It was clear that this was a problem with the gun itself. Master Li, who was following behind, still had a burning gaze, but this time, he was not looking at Yili, but at the gun in her hand. This thing that Yili disliked was as precious as a peerless beauty in his eyes. Master Li scratched his beard in annoyance and said, "We've made 2 of these things, and one of them just exploded. This one is fine, but we can't hit it. The more we hit, the more we missed. There really hasn't been anyone like Wang Fei who has hit the bullseye on the first try. However, the second and third shots were clearly not good." The difference was so great that he couldn't help but wonder if Wang Fei's first shot was an accident. "It seems like it's a problem with the materials. As for suggestions for improvement, I will organize them for you later. I'll have to trouble you to worry about the materials. I will order people to send all the needed minerals. I can't do anything else." She was not a military expert, nor was she an expert in military materials. She could only give them the general information she knew and some concepts and theories. They had to explore the rest step by step. Master Li felt some regret, but he knew he could not force this and could only nod in agreement. Master Li, who had a lot on his mind, left, but he left the gun behind. Even though this was the first finished product they had made, because the results were not satisfactory, Master Li did not feel any heartache and kept it. He even encouraged himself to make better things when they returned. Yili took out the remaining bullets in the gun before throwing it to Mo Xiaobao, who had been eagerly waiting to play. Receiving the new toy, Mo Xiaobao immediately focused all his attention on the thing in his hands. He did not care about his father holding him in his arms and not letting him come down to play. "This is something left behind by the previous Emperor Gaozu." Mo Xiaoyao looked around and asked. Yili nodded. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao and asked, "Xiaoyao, what do you think of this gun?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and looked at the thing in Mo Xiaobao's hands, saying, "It has no practical value. Its range was not as far as the arrows of a master archer. Even though the first shot had made him interested, the last 2 shots had made him disappointed. For now, it has no practical value." Yili nodded in agreement and pulled Mo Xiaoyao forward. The things that the previous emperor had prepared naturally were not just these. Even Yili herself didn't know much about it, and it wasn't like she didn't have anything that had practical value. As they walked into an empty room, the smell of sulfur greeted them. In the corner of the room, there were several wooden boxes neatly placed. Yili walked over and opened the topmost box. There were some black spherical things in the box. Mo Xiaoyao pondered for a moment before saying, "This is gunpowder." It was not that this era did not have gunpowder. There were already people who used it in war. However, gunpowder needed to be ignited with fire and its killing power was not high, so even the Mahist army did not use it often. However, this did not mean that Mo Xiaoyao was completely ignorant. Yili nodded and said, "That's right, it is gunpowder. However, I prefer to call it a bomb." Mo Xiaoyao raised his brows and asked, "How is the power?" Since Li specially showed it to him, it naturally would not be normal. Yili casually picked up one and said with a smile, "Let's try it somewhere else and we'll know." It was hard to say about other weapons, but Yili was still very confident in the power of the bomb. This was because the method to make these bombs was not left behind by the previous Emperor Gaozu. It was provided by Yili herself. As expected, the bomb was thrown into a spacious room in the underground palace. After a loud explosion, Mo Xiaoyao could not help but reveal a look of surprise. After leaving the place where the bomb was placed, Yili brought Mo Xiaoyao into the innermost secret room in the underground palace. The layout of the room was very simple. It was filled with all kinds of scrolls and magical weapons. Mo Xiaoyao saw that a few of them were the same as the ones he had seen when he passed by outside. Chapter 570. Yili took out a thick booklet from a hidden compartment and handed it to Mo Xiaoyao. She smiled and said, "This is the treasure left behind by the previous emperor." Mo Xiaoyao took the booklet and flipped through it. The pages were filled with drawings of various firearms, as well as annotations. However, there were many foreign characters in the annotations that Mo Xiaoyao could not understand. However, this did not stop him from understanding. This was a booklet filled with drawings of various weapons, and the ones that could be made here were all of the worst quality. This was because many of them looked much better than the toys that Mo Xiaobao loved so much that he could not bear to part with them. Looking at the booklet, Yili softly sighed and said, "If we can really make all of these things and mass-produce them, then the army that obtains them will be truly invincible." Mo Xiaoyao frowned slightly. He looked at Yili and asked, "Does Li like these things a lot?" Yili was slightly startled. After a long time, she nodded and said, "Yes, I like them a lot." How could she not like them? In the short 20 years of her previous life, she had been working with these things for 20 years. She was familiar with them and liked them as if they were her family and comrades. Mo Xiaoyao said, "Then let's have people make them all." Yili smiled and said, "Making them all? I'm afraid we won't be able to see it in our lifetime. If we really want to make all of these things, how can it be done without 100 or 200 years? The military was not the only aspect that was involved in this. Every aspect of technology had to be developed at the same time to be able to create such advanced weapons." Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said, "If that's the case, then this Emperor Gaozu of the previous dynasty really was a genius. It's a pity that he did not make these things back then. Or perhaps he wanted to make them but did not have the time. After the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu ascended the throne and unified the world, he did not rule for too long. Based on the scale of this underground palace, it was very likely that he died before he could complete it." Yili smiled faintly, "A genius? Perhaps. Naturally, the blueprints left behind were not considered geniuses. In fact, in Yili's opinion, these blueprints could not even be considered professional. At most, they were at the level of an amateur weapon enthusiast. However, it was not easy for a transmigrator to unify the world in a chaotic world. Even the founder of the Dechu state could not be considered to have truly unified the world. After all, Xiling and Dechu State were originally one entity. Yili herself could be considered a transmigrator or a reborn person, so she naturally understood that people like them could not be said to be blessed by the heavens. Although it was an additional chance to survive, it wasn't that easy to be as domineering as in many novels, with groups of underlings and beautiful women. Her environment was already not bad, and she had experienced so many things. One could imagine how much hardship and hard work that senior had gone through to create a dynasty. Is Li very familiar with him? Mo Xiaoya placed Mo Xiaobao on the table and turned to look at Yi Li as he asked. Mo Xiaobao seemed to have sensed that his parents were talking about something very important. He did not speak much and obediently sat on the table playing with the small toy in his hand. Just now, Yi Li had retracted the bullet too quickly, so this child did not notice that something was missing from the gun. So he was very confused as to why he could not shoot something powerful from the gun like his mother. Yi Li smiled faintly and fondly stroked the calligraphy on the booklet on the table. The person in the booklet had very showily used flowery characters to leave an English signature. The people of this era could only see it as a pattern. After pondering for a moment, Yi Li said, I am somewhat familiar with this previous dynasty's great ancestor. Perhaps no one in this world is more familiar with him than me. Mo Xiaoya was silent. Yi Li smiled at him and asked, You don't suspect my relationship with him? Mo Xiaoya said, Li is the granddaughter of the Su family. The descendants of the Su family could not have any relationship with the previous dynasty's emperor. Yi Li blinked and asked, Then you don't have anything you want to ask? Mo Xiaoya was silent for a moment before asking, Li came from the same place as him. Yi Li was stunned. She did not think that Mo Xiaoya would make such a guess. So close. No, this was the real answer. Mo Xiaoya looked at her with a gentle gaze and smiled faintly. Li has never hidden anything from me, has she? She clearly came from a scholarly family and has never interacted with outsiders, yet she has such inconceivable skills. There is also Li's familiarity with the battlefield. Occasionally, she has some strange but novel ideas. There is also the writing on that treasure map. Even the previous dynasty's imperial family did not recognize it, yet Li seems to be very familiar with it. And I feel that previous dynasty's great ancestor is actually very similar to Li in some ways. Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, So I actually revealed so many flaws. Mo Xiaoyao gently stroked Yi Li's cheek and said with a smile, Li has never hidden anything. Yi Li admitted that other than the very beginning in front of Mo Xiaoyao, she had never seriously tried to hide anything. It was not only because Mo Xiaoyao was too sensitive, but deliberately trying to hide things would only backfire. More importantly, Mo Xiaoyao was the most important person in her life. Mo Xiaoyao smiled but didn't answer, looking at Yi Li who was still angry. She really was a stupid girl. How could the usually elegant and graceful Li, whose every action was filled with flirtatious charm in his eyes, be a man in her past life? Father King, Mother. Mo Xiaobao blinked his pure big eyes as he looked at his parents, curiously asking, Father King and Mother are playing kissing? Xiaobao also wants to play. Mother, kiss kiss. In order to express his expectation, Mo Xiaobao deliberately used his little chubby hand to point at his pink and tender little mouth. Yi Li turned pale with fright. Chen who told you that Mother Anne are playing kissing? Her son was only 5 years old, did he need to be so precocious? She remembered that they had never done anything too intimate in front of Xiaobao. Was it because she always kissed Xiaobao? Mo Xiaobao seriously thought about it and said, It's Father King. Last time I saw Father King secretly kissing Mother while she was asleep. Father King said that only people who love each other can play kissing. Xiaobao also loves Mother. Xiaobao wants a kiss. Mo Xiaoyao. Yili angrily glared at Imo Xiaoyao. This month you will sleep in the study. Finished speaking, she didn't wait for Imo Xiaoyao's explanation and turned to leave. Imo Xiaoyao's face darkened as he stared at Imo Xiaobao on the table. Imo Xiaobao innocently looked at his father king with his pure big eyes. Father king, why is mother angry? Why didn't she kiss Xiaobao? Does mother not love Xiaobao anymore? Don't think that you can escape by pretending to be innocent. When did I secretly kiss your mother? Even if he secretly kissed her, how could it be seen by a 5-year-old kid? He, Imo Xiaoyao, who had been unhindered for a lifetime, was actually tricked by his own son. Seeing that Imo Xiaoyao was about to stretch out his evil claws, Imo Xiaobao quickly crawled up and used his butt to cry in front of his father. Whoa whoa. Mother doesn't love Xiaobao anymore. Xiaobao is the child that mother doesn't love. Looking at his son who was lying on the table with his little butt sticking up and crying, Imo Xiaoyao finally didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When this kid grows up, he will definitely be a disaster. Chapter 571. In the early winter of the 18th year of Emperor Jing's reign in Dechu State, the barbarian tribes in the north of Dechu State invaded. Emperor Mo Jingqi mobilized 300,000 soldiers to expel the enemy but was defeated. Of the 300,000 elite soldiers, only 70,000 to 80,000 remained and fled. Within a month, the defending generals of Dechu State retreated several cities. The Northern Army chased them all the way to Zijing Pass in the north of Dechu State. They were less than 400 li away from the Chu capital. In the 12th month, Mo Jingqi appointed Northern General Leng Huai as the general to suppress the enemy. Leng Huai's eldest son, Leng Qingyu, as the deputy general to lead 400,000 soldiers to face the enemy. However, the barbarians in the north were brave and skilled in battle. They had been fighting for many years and were very valiant. Even a veteran like Leng Huai, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, could barely hold on. It was extremely difficult to reclaim the land they had lost. The two armies in front of Zijing Pass faced each other for a long time. The people in Dechu State were also anxious and restless. Many courtiers had even suggested moving the capital to Guangling in the south. Mo Jingqi naturally would not agree to moving the capital. Now, the south was actually Mo Jingli's territory. In Jing, this younger brother of his was faintly looking down on him. If he went to the south, Mo Jingli would probably dare to directly usurp the throne. But even so, Mo Jingqi's days were not easy. Just the daily battle reports sent to the imperial court were enough to give him a headache. There were also the people who had fled to Jing because of the chaos of war. Large numbers of people flooded into Jing, but there was limited space in the capital. Naturally, it could not take in so many refugees. But if these refugees were allowed to starve, die of illness, or freeze to death, it would probably cause chaos before the powerful soldiers of the north attacked. Looking at the mountain of memorials in front of him, Mo Jingqi had a splitting headache. Only now did he have to admit in his heart that compared to Mo Xiaoyao, he was not as capable. Mo Xiaoyao was able to turn the tide in such a dire situation, but he could only rage at a mess of reports. In the depths of the imperial palace, noble consort Lu sat by the window, silently looking at the pure white snow outside. The snow-white snow fox cloak made her cold face look like an ice sculpture, chilling to the bone. Behind her, Tanjiji was sitting on a soft couch at the side. He was holding onto a heater as he revealed a comfortable expression and sighed, "Isn't imperial concubine Nyang Nyang afraid of the cold? It's all white outside, what's there to see?" Noble consort Lu looked back and glanced at him coldly. "Why are you here?" Tanjiji smiled and said, "Of course I'm here to help noble consort." Noble consort Lu sneered and said disdainfully, "Help me?" He was nothing more than a drowning dog that was wanted in Nanzhao. "What's the use of you and Shu Manlin's meticulous plans? If Prince Ding and Su Qingqian moved their fingers, wouldn't you have no choice but to run away with your tail between your legs? Now that you don't have Shu Manlin, what other cards do you have? Tan Jiji's expression changed slightly. A trace of anger and viciousness flashed through his eyes. He quickly smiled and said, "Does noble consort Nyang Nyang think that Shu Manlin is the only card I have?" Noble consort Lu looked at him calmly and said, "What else do you have? Do you want to say that you're a descendant of the imperial family of the previous dynasty? You're all descendants of the imperial family. That young master Lin Yuan did much better than you. You've been working hard for so many years without accomplishing anything, and you still dare to say that you want to help I? Shut up." Tan Jiji was furious. His expression was ferocious. Who does Ren Qining think he is? He's just an imposter. He was the imperial family's descendant of the previous dynasty. He was Lin Yuan. Ren Qining was just an imposter who came out of nowhere. Noble consort Lu snorted and didn't say anything else, but the contempt in her eyes was obvious. Did he think that the title of the imperial family's descendant was valuable? A descendant of the imperial family that had perished nearly 200 years ago because the people had no way to make a living could never win the support of the people. That Ren Qining, who called himself Lin Yuan, probably saw this clearly and chose to start from the northern region. As long as he really took over the world and announced his identity as the imperial family's descendant, the resistance to his ascension to the throne would be much lower. Compared to a foreign race entering the Central Plains and becoming the emperor, the people and gentry would naturally be more willing to accept a descendant of the previous dynasty with noble blood. Seeing noble consort lose contempt, Tan Jiji breathed heavily to hide the viciousness in his eyes. Finally, he laughed and said, "You really don't need it. Maybe I can tell noble consort Lu a very important piece of news." Of course, if noble consort Lu isn't interested, then forget it. Noble consort Lu frowned slightly and stared at Tan Jiji with some displeasure. It seemed that she was considering whether she should listen to his so-called news. Tan Jiji leaned on the soft couch and said with a smile, "Noble consort Lu, don't worry. This may not be bad news for you." Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes. "It may not be bad news, but it could be bad news. Go ahead." Tan Jiji raised his eyebrows and said, "Prince Li bought a magical medicine from the holy land of Nanjiang." Noble consort Lu looked at him coldly and didn't even blink. Her indifferent look seemed to be saying that it had nothing to do with her. Tan Jiji laughed loudly and looked at noble consort Lu, saying, "I like noble consort Lu's personality. It's so cold and heartless that it makes people admire you." That was why Prince Ding didn't like this kind of woman. She was as beautiful as an ice sculpture, and her heart was so cold and heartless that it could make any man admire her wholeheartedly. Look at the Princess Ding married to Prince Ding. She was elegant and graceful when she was calm, but radiant when she acted. She could be kind and cruel, but she could also be gentle and strong. She had outstanding abilities and a devoted husband. She had an extraordinary status, but she wasn't arrogant at all. This kind of woman was the dream of every man. Noble consort Lu's appearance and talent were nothing in the eyes of a man who really had excellent taste. Of course, he would never tell this proud woman in front of him about this. Noble consort Lu looked at Tan Jiji with a frown. For some reason, she felt that Tan Jiji's words weren't all compliments. But it didn't matter. She had never taken Tan Jiji seriously, so she didn't care what he thought of her. "Noble consort Lu, are you really not interested in what Prince Li bought? Or, noble consort Lu, you don't want to know who Prince Li bought it for?" Tan Jiji said with a smile. Noble consort Lu thought of something and looked at Tan Jiji calmly. Tan Jiji knew her very well, so he knew that he had aroused her interest. Tan Jiji didn't try to hide it. He said with a smile, yes, it's what you think. It's for the one in the imperial study. And, I guess that the medicine has been used for a month. Noble Consort Lu frowned and said, His Majesty doesn't feel unwell. Tanjiji said with a smile, of course he doesn't feel unwell. Not only that, his body will be very good. But, once the medicine stops or it's been used for too long, His Majesty will suffer a lot. There used to be a lot of medicine, but after Princess Anqi ascended the throne, the sacred land of Nanjiang rebelled and burned the entire sacred land of Nanjiang to the ground. Of course, the medicine is gone. Mo Xiuyao has no more than half a year's supply. Noble Consort Lu thought for a while with a frown, then asked, What do you want? Chapter 572. Tanjiji smiled faintly, What I want. I'm afraid you can't give it to me right now. Why don't we talk about it when you can? The noble consort lowered her eyes, hiding the sharpness and murderous intent in her eyes. She said faintly, All right, as long as I can do it, I can promise you anything. However, what can you do for I right now? Tanjiji smiled, This one has been by Mo Jingqi's side for more than a decade. No one in this world knows better than me what he will do. Isn't this enough? Doesn't noble consort Lu want to know who Mo Jingqi's true confidants are? Also, I can help you deal with Princely. Noble consort Lu's eyes moved. After a while, she nodded and said, It's a deal. I hope you won't disappoint. Tanjiji smiled, Noble consort, just wait and see. The 19 years of Emperor Jing's reign could be considered the worst year since the founding of Dechu state. Before the new year was over, news of Ling Huai's defeat and his request for help came from the border. It had to be known that Zijing Pass was less than 400 li away from the capital. If they rode fast, they could get there in one day. If they continued to lose at this distance, they would be right in front of their eyes. In addition, just after receiving Ling Huai's request for help, Mo Jingqi fell ill. Although he was barely able to attend court, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the emperor was seriously ill just by looking at his sallow complexion and dispirited spirit. With the two matters overlapping, it made people feel as if there was no light at all. It was as if Dechu state's fate was coming to an end. Mo Jingqi barely managed to gather the troops and rations to support Ling Huai before he fell ill on the bed and was bedridden. In the bedroom, the Empress Dowager, who had been abstaining from worldly affairs for a long time, and the Empress, who had been recuperating behind closed doors, appeared. At the same time, Princely, Noble Consort Lu, Prime Minister Lu, and several princes of the imperial family were waiting in the room. After the imperial physician finished taking the pulse, the Empress Dowager anxiously asked, Imperial physician, what's wrong with the emperor's body? The imperial physician who was taking the pulse frowned and respectfully said, The emperor seems to have taken some medicine that is harmful to his body. Coupled with the daily fatigue, his body suddenly collapsed. The Empress Dowager suddenly stood up and said, What do you mean by harmful drugs? Someone poisoned the emperor. The imperial physician shook his head and said, Forgive me, Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager misunderstood. What this humble subject means is, His Majesty seems to have taken something forbidden. That's why he hurt his body. The expressions of everyone in the sleeping chamber changed instantly, and they all became a little strange. The forbidden medicines mentioned by the imperial physicians were mostly things like the 5 minerals powder or some drugs that were used to kill wolves and tigers. In history, there were some dynasties where taking 5 minerals powder became the norm, but from the previous dynasty to the Dechu state, it was listed as a forbidden drug. If word of this got out, the emperor and the imperial family would lose all face. Emperor! You are really stupid. The Empress Dowager glared at her son on the bed and said hatefully. Although she didn't love this son as much as she did her younger son, the Empress Dowager didn't want him to die. Seeing him lying sickly on the bed, the Empress Dowager only felt resentful that he didn't live up to her expectations. Mo Jingqi opened his mouth and endured the pain in his heart that was like being bitten by ants. He frowned and said, "Jin didn't." He knew that no one would believe him because his current symptoms did seem like someone who was addicted to 5 minerals powder. However, he knew the effects of the cold stones powder, so he was sure that he had never taken that forbidden medicine before. His gaze fell on Mo Jingli standing on the side. Mo Jingqi froze and suddenly thought of something. He fiercely glared at Mo Jingli. How could Mo Jingli not see Mo Jingqi's gaze? He walked forward and his usually stern face revealed a faint smile. "Imperial brother, do you have any orders?" "You. It's you." That faint smile was provocative and complacent in Mo Jingqi's eyes. He pointed at Mo Jingli and gasped. Mo Jingli didn't show any fear of his plot being exposed. He still said respectfully, "Imperial brother, what are you talking about? I don't understand." Prime Minister Liu had long been ready to make trouble. How could he let go of this opportunity? He stepped forward and said, "Prince Li, His Majesty is obviously referring to the forbidden drug you gave to His Majesty." Mo Jingqi glanced at Prime Minister Liu and nodded. Obviously, he agreed with Prime Minister Liu. Prime Minister Liu became more confident. He pointed at Mo Jingli and said harshly, "Prince Li, how dare you? How dare you?" The Empress Dowager said harshly. She stared at Prime Minister Liu coldly and said, "Prince Li and His Majesty are blood brothers. How could he hurt His Majesty? Now we are facing a great enemy. As the Prime Minister, you don't help His Majesty wholeheartedly. Instead, you sow discord between His Majesty's brothers. How should you be punished?" Prime Minister Liu frowned and said, "Empress Dowager, this is His Majesty's idea. Even if there is no evidence, it is a serious crime to murder His Majesty. Shouldn't Prince Li be arrested first and then investigated?" The Empress Dowager stared at Mo Jingqi with tears in her eyes and said, "Emperor, do you really think so? Do you think Li Er wants to hurt you? Without any evidence, you suspect your own younger brother. Are you going to lock me up as well?" Mo Jingli stepped forward and said, "Imperial brother, please be clear. This younger brother will definitely not have the intention to kill you. If you don't believe me, just give the order to kill me." Mo Jingqi stared at Mo Jingli with hatred. It seemed that he wanted to cut Mo Jingli into pieces. However, he couldn't say a word at this moment. He felt that his limbs and bones were being bitten by countless ants. If he didn't care so much about his face, he would have been rolling on the bed and screaming in pain. His lips trembling, Mo Jingqi spat out a few words. "Get out! Get out!" Everyone was stunned. Prime Minister Liu looked at Mo Jingqi anxiously. At this moment, they should take advantage of the victory and arrest Prince Li. However, since His Majesty had spoken, the others naturally couldn't stay. The Empress Dowager stood up and said, "Emperor, take care of yourself. I will go back first." The Empress Dowager left first, and the others had to follow her. Mo Jingli was the last to leave. He looked back at Mo Jingli, who was lying on the bed, with a weird smile on his face. Back in Zhangde Palace, Missouri Jingli said respectfully to the Empress Dowager, "Mother, thank you very much, Pa." Before he could finish speaking, a slap landed swiftly and harshly on Mo Jingli's face. Mo Jingli stopped talking and raised his head to look at the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager's eyes were cold and full of sadness and disappointment. "Li Er, how dare you use such a vicious drug on Chief Er? He is your brother. Do you still have any humanity?" Mo Jingli wanted to explain. "Mother, The Empress Dowager waved her hand and said coldly, "You don't need to explain. I am not muddle-headed." Mo Jingli put down his hand that was covering half of his face. The Empress Dowager's slap was not for show. A few red and swollen finger marks appeared on Mo Jingli's face immediately. Mo Jingli stopped quibbling and said coldly, "Mother, you are right. So what if I did it? Is Imperial Mother the same as that old man surnamed Lu? Do you also want to lock me up?" Although she knew it was Mo Jingli who did it, the Empress Dowager was still emotional when she heard it from him. She couldn't help crying. Her face, which had been well maintained, suddenly aged more than 10 years. She sat on the luxurious phoenix chair, tears streaming down her face. What a sin! Why did I give birth to you two bastards? I am sorry to the late emperor, I am sorry to the ancestors of the Mo family. Mo Jingli looked coldly at the Empress Dowager's crying appearance. He didn't feel any guilt in his heart. The one who stirred up the ambition in his heart was no one else but the crying mother in front of him. Because she was dissatisfied with her imperial brother controlling her day by day, she wanted to depose him and push him to the throne. The struggle for the throne had always been a bloody one, and now she was blaming him for being cruel and merciless. It was a pity that there was no turning back. He and Mo Jingchi were destined to fight to the death the moment his ambition was born. Li heir. Qi heir is your brother. Give the antidote to him. Mother will protect you. The Empress Dowager was finally tired from crying and said in a hoarse voice. Mo Jingli's lips curled into a mocking smile, "Mother, after being the Empress Dowager for more than 10 years, you are even more naive than before." The Empress Dowager was stunned. She coldly looked at the familiar yet strange son in front of her, as if she didn't know him. Mo Jingli lightly said, "Not to mention that I don't have the antidote, even if I did. I wouldn't give it. Mother, do you really think that if Mo Jingchi was cured, he would let me go?" The Empress Dowager was so angry by his heartless words that she trembled. She pointed at Mo Jingli and angrily said, You bastard. You. A lifetime of fighting for power. Now that she was over 60 years old, she was really tired. She only hoped that her two sons would be safe and sound. But why did she have to watch her two sons kill each other in her 60 years of age? Was this really retribution? Mo Jingli indifferently smiled and said, "Since it's like this, why didn't Mother follow that old man surnamed Lu's wishes and just lock Son up? In Mother's eyes, isn't there something more important than your son?" The Empress Dowager silently pointed at Mo Jingli and couldn't say anything for a while. That's right. In her heart, there was still something more important than her son, which was power. If Qi couldn't make it, then Li couldn't have anything happen to him. Otherwise, if something happened to Qi one of the two princes born by noble consort Lu would ascend the throne. The Empress Dowager had always been on bad terms with noble consort Lu's family. If noble consort Lu's son became the emperor, what good would it bring her? Even though the Empress Dowager was noble, her grandmother was far less intimate than her mother. Moreover, noble consort Lu's son was not close to her. But even so, it didn't mean that she was willing to let her younger son kill her elder son. You. The Empress Dowager looked at her gloomy son in front of her and found that she didn't know what to say. Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows and said, "Mother, don't worry. I won't kill him. He is still my brother, isn't he?" Of course, he wouldn't kill Mo Jingchi. He wanted him to lie on the bed unable to move and watch as he held power in his hands and even ruled over the world. More importantly, he couldn't let Mo Jingchi die too suddenly. Even though Mo Xiaoyao had severed ties with the Dechu state, Mo Jingli wasn't sure if he would use Mo Jingchi's death as an excuse to attack the Dechu state. From beginning to end, Mo Jingli had never believed that Mo Xiaoyao didn't have ambition. He just lacked an excuse to realize his ambition. Chapter 573. Because of the emperor's serious illness, the entire palace was gloomy even before the new year. In the past few days, King Li's faction and Prime Minister Lu's faction had been fighting both openly and secretly. Everyone who was well informed knew why the emperor had fallen ill. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the golden throne in the hall. Even the request for help from Zijing Pass was ignored. Mo Jingqi was lying on the bed. He was muddle-headed every day. It was difficult for him to even take care of himself, let alone deal with the affairs of the court. Prince. The eunuch guarding outside the bedchamber had curled up his hands and feet to keep warm because of the cold weather. Seeing the man in brocade striding over, he hurriedly went forward to salute with a flattering smile on his face. Mo Jingli looked at the eunuch in front of him proudly and said coldly, "I have something to discuss with my royal brother." The eunuch was stunned and said awkwardly, "But now the emperor." Mo Jingli glanced around and said coldly, "What?" "I want to see my royal brother, do I need your permission?" The eunuchs at the door were all shocked. They had received orders from Imperial Concubine and Prime Minister Lu to prevent King Li from entering, but no one knew the situation in the palace now. King Li was powerful now. They couldn't afford to offend him. After hesitating and deceiving, the eunuchs finally retreated and said with a flattering smile, "We don't dare." "Prince, please." Mo Jingli snorted and stepped into the bedchamber. The bright yellow and luxurious furnishings came into sight. Mo Jingli's eyes shook slightly. Looking at Mo Jingqi lying on the bed silently, Mo Jingli suddenly felt a trace of indescribable pleasure. He knew Mo Jingqi wasn't asleep. He walked to the bedside and looked down at the sallow and emaciated man on the bed. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. The secret medicine he got from Nanjiang was much more effective than the so-called 5 minerals powder. He didn't feel anything when taking it, but once he stopped taking it, it was 100 times more effective than the 5 minerals powder. It had only been a few days, but Mo Jingqi had already become so skinny. After thinking about it, Mo Jingli stuffed an extremely small pill into Mo Jingqi's mouth. Mo Jingqi's dark and dazed eyes gradually regained a trace of light. When he saw the person standing in front of his window, his eyes flashed with anger, and his throat gurgled. Mo Jingli remained calm and unruffled. He tilted his head and asked, "What does Imperial Brother want to say?" You still dare to come?" Mo Jingqi hissed. He hadn't spoken or eaten anything for several days, so his throat was dry and hoarse. Mo Jingli laughed, "Why wouldn't I dare to come? Imperial Brother, I'm worried about you." Mo Jingqi glared angrily at the person in front of him, as if he wanted to bite him to death. Mo Jingli leisurely walked to the bed and sat down. Looking at Mo Jingqi's angry expression, a strange smile appeared on his face. "Imperial Brother, you really shouldn't blame me. If you want to blame someone, blame Imperial Mother. If she hadn't instilled those thoughts in me in order to suppress you, if she hadn't supported me to fight against you for her own power. Who knows, maybe we're still a pair of good brothers who respect each other. Imperial Brother, do you know how much of a failure you are as a person? Look at you. Imperial Mother wants to deal with you, Imperial Brother wants to deal with you, the Imperial family ignores you. You think they don't know that your illness is strange? But did they ask? If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being too cruel to the Imperial family. That's why no one is willing to help you when you're in trouble. Even your favorite noble consort Lu and the Lu family, I'm afraid they already have their own plans." Mo Jingqi opened his eyes wide, revealing a look of disbelief. Mo Jingli didn't care and asked leisurely, "Has noble consort Lu come to see you these days?" "No." "That's right, noble consort Lu's heart is all on Mo Xiuyao." Why would she come to see you at this time? The Lu family is helping to put noble consort Lu's son on the throne. Mo Jingqi was so angry that his face turned blue. He wanted to roar, but his body didn't even have the strength to roar. Mo Jingli continued, Imperial brother, do you know, if I, your younger brother, ascend to the throne, you may still have a way to live. After all, even if it's for the sake of Imperial Mother and Mo Xiuyao, younger brother will still let you live. But if noble consort Lu's son ascends to the throne, I promise you won't live for more than a month. After all, if there's a retired emperor above the little emperor, how can noble consort Lu be the empress dowager who governs from behind a curtain? Imperial brother, you didn't expect your cold and arrogant noble consort to have such ambition, did you? Do you know why she wants to govern from behind a curtain? Ha! She wants to control the entire Dechu state and then compete with Yili for Mo Xiuyao. What an infatuated woman. Don't you think so, Imperial brother? Wah! Mo Jingqi's face turned green and red. Finally, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He laid on the bed and didn't even have the strength to get up. This mouthful of blood covered his neck and the front of his robes. Even the lower half of his face was covered in blood. He looked terrible and pitiful. The emperor of a generation had fallen to this state. It was easy to imagine the anger and sorrow in his heart. Mo Jingli looked at him without a trace of pity in his eyes. How is it? Imperial brother, have you thought it through? Mo Jingqi stared at him for a long time, then suddenly laughed. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes in displeasure at the sight of the bloodstained face and that eerie smile. Mo Jingqi panted for a while before opening his mouth to say, You want to force this one to do it? Little brother. Don't forget that I am the older brother. The methods you used on that side were all left over from this one. Back then. This one really shouldn't have shown mercy to you. Mo Jingli knit his brows. Seeing Mo Jingqi smile, his heart felt a bit uneasy. At this point, he really couldn't think of any other methods Mo Jingqi could have. Mo Jingli's brows furrowed tightly as he stared at the messy man on the bed. Mo Jingqi looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. He slowly said, Jingli. After all these years, you only have one child, right? Mo Jingli slightly narrowed his eyes. He didn't understand why he would mention this at this time. He only heard Mo Jingqi slowly say, If this one says that you will only have one child in this lifetime, what will you do? What will you do? What do you mean? Mo Jingli's expression changed. He stepped forward and grabbed Mo Jingqi's collar to pull him up from the bed. For a man, having an heir was sometimes more important than having power. Although many people could sacrifice their children for power, that was because they had many children. If they didn't have a single one, then all the power and status in the world would immediately decrease by more than half. Sitting on the throne but not being able to pass it to one's own son was like a person who had painstakingly saved up a lifetime of money, only to end up benefiting someone else's son. Although Mo Jingli didn't have a son, his only son, Yi Ying's child, was indeed young and sickly. He wasn't even 7 years old, but people were always worried that he wouldn't live past the age of 20. Hearing Mo Jingqi say this, Mo Jingli's heart shook. He fiercely stared at Mo Jingqi and said, What did you do? No. You couldn't have had the chance to drug me. Mo Jingli wasn't someone who didn't have his guard up. In fact, he was more guarded against his older brother than anyone else. Normally, he was especially careful with his food, clothing, housing, and transportation. Mo Jingli wouldn't have had the chance to drug him. Chapter 574. Mo Jingqi chuckled. Seeing his younger brother's angry appearance made his mood very good. Jingli, you should thank Jin for letting you keep a child. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for not being a good prince and going against Jin. Mo Jingli's face was dark. After a long time, he suddenly sneered, you also said that I still have a son. Do you believe that I won't kill all of your sons one by one? Mo Jingqi did not care about his threat at all. He smiled faintly, do you really think that the one in your fu is your son? Jingli, you don't know. When Princess Consort Li gave birth to that child, Jin personally held him. That is a white, tender, and sturdy little boy. That sickly child of yours is not even half as big as him. Bastard! Mo Jingli was furious. He fiercely threw Mo Jingqi back onto the bed. Then he pounced forward and grabbed his neck, shouting angrily, where did you take Ai's son? Speak! Mo Jingqi seemed to not see the hand tightly strangling his neck. His waxy yellow face was red from choking. He still had his eyes half closed and did not care. In the end, Mo Jingli could only let him go in defeat. He could not really kill Mo Jingqi now. At that time, he would not need the throne. He would become a monarch killer. Looking at the person lying on the bed, Mo Jingli sneered, you won't say anything. You think that I don't have a way to deal with you. I will kill a prince a day for you to see. There will be a day when you will speak. Mo Jingqi opened his eyes and looked at him. He calmly said, Jin is about to die, how can I control them? Even if you kill all of Jin's sons, so what? Chang'e is still in the northwest. Even if she is a daughter, she is still Jin's blood. As for you, you are destined to have no descendants. As long as you kill a prince, I guarantee that your son will be sent to your dining table the next morning. At this point, Mo Jingli had to admit that he was not as ruthless as his brother. What do you want? You should know that your body will never recover. Do you think you'll be safe and sound if you give the throne to noble consort Lu? In order to be absolutely safe, he would never use the antidote. When noble consort Lu was mentioned, Mo Jingqi's eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. He lowered his eyes and pondered for a while before saying, what I want to do has nothing to do with you. Not long after, Mo Jingqi's decree came from the palace. Noble consort Lu's eldest son, Mo Jingli, was conferred the title of Crown Prince. In addition, Prince Li, Mo Jingli, was conferred the title of Prince Regent. Once the imperial edict was released, the entire court was naturally shocked, but they did not understand the emperor's intentions. The courtiers who wanted to pick a side were also confused. Should they choose the crown prince or Prince Li? Inside the Li prince's mansion when Mo Jingli returned to the residence, Yi Ying and Princess Xixia came to greet him. Princess Xixia was still as beautiful as a flower, bright and moving. In comparison, Yi Ying looked much paler and thinner. The young woman who was just in her early 20s looked like she was nearing her 30s. She was holding the hand of a boy who looked less than 5 years old. However, everyone in the Prince Ding mansion knew that this prince and princess consort Lu's pampered little heir was already 7 years old this year. Prince, congratulations to Prince for being conferred the title of Prince Regent. From now on, you have great power in your hands. Princess Xixia's smile was bright and charming. She looked sincere and happy, but she did not deliberately flatter him. This made Mo Jingli, who originally had a dark expression, unable to help but reveal a trace of a smile. A trace of jealousy flashed through Yi Ying's eyes. She led her son forward and said with a smile, Qinxie and the little heir also congratulate Prince for being conferred the title of Prince Regent. After saying this, she slightly pinched the little heir's hand, indicating for him to speak. The little child's face was pale, and his body was so weak that it looked like he could fall over with a gust of wind. He leaned close to Yi Ying's side, as if he was very afraid of his father, Mo Jingli. Yi Ying secretly gritted her teeth. She really did not understand. She and Mo Jingli were not cowardly people. Why was it that this son of theirs was as timid as a mouse? Even his own father was afraid of him. The child timidly raised his head. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's as he called out to his father. Then, he had nothing else to say. Mo Jingli looked at the cowering child in front of him and only felt the anger in his heart boil. It was as if it was about to burst out at any moment. How could such a weak and timid child be his, Mo Jingli's, son? He could not help but think of Mo Jingqi lying on the bed before he left the palace. Although he was very weak, his eyes were still filled with pride. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. His eyes that stared at the child seemed to be about to spit fire. Prince. Yi Ying looked at Mo Jingli with some confusion. At this moment, of course, she could tell that Mo Jingli was not happy because he had become the Prince Regent. In fact, he was very angry now. Yi Ying carefully supported her son who wanted to hide behind her out of fear and asked carefully. Mo Jingli coldly snorted, sending the child flying with a kick. After he sent people to investigate carefully, he found out that the midwives during Yi Ying's delivery were all arranged by Mo Jingqi. After Yi Ying gave birth, everyone in the manor had been replaced. No one knew where they went. Mo Jingli knew that Mo Jingqi was not lying. The sickly child in front of him was not his son at all. He really did not look like himself or Yi Ying. He was not ugly, but it was definitely obvious that even if he grew up, he would only be an ordinary-looking child. Prince! Yi Ying screamed. All the servants and maids present, including Princess Xixia, were shocked. Yi Ying pounced on the child. The child fell to the ground and vomited 2 mouthfuls of blood. He could not even cry. It looked like he was about to die. Yi Ying was so frightened that she almost did not dare to touch the child. She could only scream, "Son! Quick! Quick, go to the imperial physician." The servants came to their senses and looked at Mo Jingli hesitantly. The little heir was kicked by the prince. It was naturally up to the prince to call for the imperial physician. Although most people did not know medicine, they could tell that the little heir had been weak and sickly since he was young. After being kicked so hard by the prince, it was obvious that he was about to die. "You are not allowed to go," Mo Jingli said coldly. Yi Ying looked up at Mo Jingli in shock. Tears hung on her face. She was momentarily at a loss. Prince! Prince! Mo Jingli's hatred for Yi Ying had reached its peak. This woman could not do anything right. Back then, he had really gone crazy to want to marry her. And because of that, he missed the opportunity. He went forward, grabbed Yi Ying, and dragged her into the courtyard. Yi Ying kept struggling. She looked at the dying child and cried endlessly. "No! Prince, the child." Mo Jingli's figure was behind the screen wall. Everyone present looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Princess Xixia looked at the child on the ground. A gloating smile appeared on her lips. She waved her hand and said, "Let's wait until the prince is done with his work." Yi Ying, who was being dragged away by Mo Jingli, struggled all the way. However, how could a weak woman like her break free? Yi Ying was dragged back into the room by Mo Jingli. He pushed her hard. She lost her balance and bumped into the table in the room. Yi Ying looked up and said with tears in her eyes, "Prince, why did you do that? That's our child. How could you be so heartless?" "Shut up," Mo Jingli said coldly. He stared coldly at Yi Ying and said, "You're such an incompetent fool. You didn't even know that your child was swapped. You let I raise a bastard from who knows where for 7 years." Yi Ying was stunned. She could not understand the meaning of Mo Jingli's words. Mo Jingli stared at her and said coldly, "Don't you understand? That sickly child is not I's son at all. That child was swapped when he was born. How could it be? That's impossible. Ying cried out involuntarily. The son she had carefully taken care of for several years was not her biological son. Then where did the child she gave birth to go? Prince, then, where is our child? Ying asked anxiously. Mo Jingli said hatefully, in Mo Jingqi's hands. Hearing that, Ying fell onto the chair weakly. All these years she was well aware of the relationship between Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi. Now that the child had fallen into Mo Jingqi's hands, would there be a day she could get it back? Ying grabbed Mo Jingli's clothes in a panic and cried, "Prince, save our child. Begs you to save our child." Sob sob. My poor child. Mo Jingli pushed her away in annoyance. Of course, he would save the child. He had to save him. Looking coldly at Ying who was crying by the table, Mo Jingli only felt that this once delicate and lovely woman was incomparably annoying. From today onwards, you stay in the backyard and don't come out. I don't want to see you again. Ying was stunned. She had just heard that her son had fallen into Mo Jingqi's hands, and now she was being grounded by Mo Jingli. How could she bear it? Why? Ying looked at Mo Jingli absent-mindedly. All these years, she had already lost his love. If it were not for her son, she would have been forgotten long ago. The sweet love in the past was like a dream. Now, was she going to lose all that she had left? Mo Jingli said coldly, "If it weren't for your stupidity, how could I not know the whereabouts of my son for so many years? Do you know what I have lost because of your stupidity? Back then, mother was right. You are indeed a stupid and incompetent woman. If I didn't marry you back then." Thinking of the gentle woman he had seen once in An City last year, Mo Jingli couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. After so many years, she was still as elegant as an orchid, graceful and elegant. If it were her, this would never have happened. After taking one last look at Ying, Mo Jingli left without any reluctance. Leaving behind Ying, who was in a daze, silently crying. After a long time, the sound of sobbing finally came from the room. Chapter 575. In an inconspicuous courtyard in the Chu capital, Leng Haoyu sat in the study with a gloomy expression. Murong Ting walked in with a cup of ginseng tea. When she saw the green shadow under his eyelids, she couldn't help but frown. What happened? Why are you in such a difficult situation? Last night, Leng Haoyu had been acting strangely after receiving a letter. He didn't sleep the whole night and just sat in the study in a daze. If it was a few years ago, Murong Ting would have grabbed him and scolded him. However, after being married for a few years and living together, Murong Ting's impression of Leng Haoyu was no longer the idle playboy. Moreover, after becoming a wife and mother, her temper had obviously improved a lot. Putting the ginseng tea on the table, Murong Ting looked down at the letter on the table. Leng Haoyu didn't intend to hide it from her. He opened the letter and placed it on the table. It turned out that it was a letter sent by Leng Hui from Zijing Pass. Zijing Pass was now in urgent need of provisions, but the imperial court was busy with major events. Prime Minister Lu's faction and Prince Li's faction were in full swing, so no one paid attention to the letter sent by Leng Hui for help. Murong Ting frowned and sneered. Does eunuch really think of us as a national treasury? He doesn't even know if you have the ability to ask for 100,000 dan of provisions. Where are we going to get it for him? It was naturally not difficult for Leng Haoyu to get 100,000 dan of provisions, but that was the property of the Prince Ding mansion. It was not something that Leng Haoyu could use at will. Moreover, Although the outside world knew that Leng Haoyu had been doing business outside for a few years, it would be strange if they weren't targeted by people from all walks of life if he casually gave out 100,000 dan of provisions. The Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state no longer had anything to do with each other. Without Prince Ding's personal consent, who would dare to use provisions to support the Dechu state's army? However, Murong Ting also understood Leng Haoyu's dilemma. No matter how much Ling Huai ignored Leng Haoyu, he was still Leng Haoyu's biological father. Murong Ting also felt conflicted about the Dechu state. Leng Haoyu was a member of the Prince Ding mansion, so Murong Ting was naturally a member of the Prince Ding mansion. However, her father, Murong Shen, was a general who guarded the borders of Dechu state. They were of the same bloodline. How could it be so easy to cut them off? Looking at her husband's haggard and tired appearance, Murong Ting could only sigh helplessly and comfort him. We have already sent the news to the northwest. I think the prince's consort will reply soon. Father-in-law's side won't be unable to hold on for a few days. Leng Haoyu forced a smile. He leaned against the chair and reached out to hold his wife's hand on his shoulder. He apologized. I've made you worry. Murong Ting rolled her eyes at him and said, What are you talking about? We're husband and wife. If I'm not worried about you, who am I worried about? If you have the time to sit here and worry, you might as well have a good sleep. What if Prince Ding gives you some orders? You won't be able to handle it even if you're tired. Leng Haoyu smiled helplessly. How could he not understand the logic? It was just that the person who was experiencing the rain of swords and spears on the battlefield right now was his father. Although his father only had his eldest brother in his eyes since he was young, it was undeniable that in his heart, he had always longed for his father's recognition. That was why he and Feng San became good friends. They both longed for their father's gaze and recognition but had never received it. It was just that Feng San was more carefree and more decisive than him. Reporting to young Master Leng, Prince's secret letter has arrived. Someone outside the door reported in a low voice. Leng Haoyu stood up in surprise and said loudly, Come in quickly. He didn't know what Prince's decision was, but he hoped to know the result as soon as possible. The man outside the door whispered a sealed letter and then left. Leng Haoyu opened the letter and read it 10 lines at a glance. A trace of joy flashed through his eyes. Murong Ting only needed to look at his expression to know that it was a good result. She couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Although she hated the Leng family, she didn't want them to die. At least, she didn't want Leng Huai to die like this. Otherwise, Leng Haoyu would definitely be sad. Leng Haoyu finished reading the letter and raised his head. Murong Ting asked, How is it? What did Prince Ding say? Leng Haoyu thought for a while and said, Ting, go to Marquis Muyang's residence in a while. Just like the Leng family, Marquis Muyang's residence has outstanding military achievements for generations. Now that the border is in danger, it's time for them to contribute. Murong Ting frowned and said, Marquis Muyang has already had the intention to retire in the past few years. Can Yaoji persuade him? Leng Haoyu sneered and said, If he can't, isn't there still Muyang? Murong Ting nodded and said, I know. I haven't seen Marquis Muyang's heir consort for some time. I'll get someone to send a letter over later. Leng Haoyu nodded and smiled, There's another good news. Murong Ting raised her eyebrows and looked at him with a smile. Leng Haoyu said in a low voice, Prince and Princess will be coming to the capital in a few days. Hearing this, Murong Ting was shocked. At this time, Prince and Princess. Leng Haoyu laughed in a low voice, Li City has Mr. Hongyu and young Master Qingchen overseeing it. Outside, there are generals and hundreds of thousands of Mahist armies stationed. Where can't Prince and Princess go? Chapter 576. This was the scene Mu Yang saw when he came in. A beautiful woman lovingly looked at the child who was reading with his head lowered. The light of the setting sun shone through the window, adding some warmth to the cold winter. Mu Yang saw this and felt warmth in his heart. The smile on his face deepened. Lai, are you studying? Mu Yang walked up and asked with a smile. The child named Mu Lai put away his book and stood up. He respectfully said, "Father." Mu Yang lovingly patted Mu Lai's head and said with a smile, "Teacher assigns a lot of homework. I know you work hard, but you can't be too tired." A trace of embarrassment and shyness flashed across Mu Lai's small face, but there was more joy. He nodded and said, "I'm not tired. Thank you for your concern." Mu Yang only felt that his son was very sensible and felt comforted. Good child. Mu Yang truly loved his son who had been missing for 6 years. Because she felt guilty, she wasn't very strict with him. Mu Yang looked at Yaoji who was sitting on the side and watching the two indifferently. He smiled softly and said, "What are you doing in the afternoon? If you're bored, you can go out for a walk." Yaoji shook her head and said, "There's nothing to see. I'll just accompany Lai in the courtyard. If I go out, it'll be a disaster." A trace of guilt flashed across Mu Yang's face. He knew that she did not come back willingly. If it wasn't for her son, she would never have come back. Mu Yang felt a sharp pain in his heart when he thought of the haggard Yaoji carrying the seriously ill Mu Lai in front of him a few months ago. So even though Yaoji was always indifferent to him, he still felt very satisfied. As long as the mother and son were by his side, everything would be perfect. Yaoji looked at him in a daze and lowered her eyes. "You seem to be busy these days." Mu Yang smiled and said, "I've been busy these days. I haven't eaten with you and Lai for 2 days." It was rare for Yaoji to ask about him. Mu Yang only thought that she was concerned about him and his smile deepened. He casually told Yaoji about these days. "You also know that the court is very chaotic these days. Our family was loyal to the emperor, but now that the emperor was seriously ill, it was still unknown who would win the battle between the Liu family and Li Wang. At this time, if they chose to stand on a side, it would be good if they won, but if they lost, they would be doomed eternally. These days, Prince Li's men and Liu clan's men had been trying their best to rope in Marquis Muyang. Although Marquis Muyang had yet to react, he probably wouldn't be able to hold on for long. At this time, not many people could choose to stay out of this. It was not that they did not want to, but that they could not. A few days ago, I heard that General Lang was trapped in the Purple Thorns Pass. Is it because the people of the northern region have already retreated? Yaoji asked carelessly. Mu Yang smiled bitterly and said, "The people of the northern region came prepared. They have a strong army and strong horses. How can they retreat so easily? General Lang is barely holding on." While they were talking, Mu Yang suddenly stopped and pondered. Yaoji didn't look at him. She casually leaned against the window and said, "The enemy is about to reach the city. I don't know what else these people can do. Are they fighting to be the ruler of the fallen country?" Mu Yang smiled bitterly and looked at Yaoji, saying, "You can't talk nonsense." But he knew Yaoji's temperament and couldn't bear to lightly blame her. At the same time, he agreed with Yaoji's words. The battle at the Purple Thorns Pass was dangerous, but Prince Li and Liu clan only cared about fighting for power. Once the Purple Thorns Pass was broken, it would be a flat land from the north to the capital. In less than 2 days, the northern Jin army would reach the city. If at this time, the Mu clan was guarding the border like the Lin clan, they might be able to get out of this battle. As long as the Purple Thorns Pass was defended, the Mu clan would be the hero who won in the future. Thinking of this, Mu Yang couldn't wait. He said softly to Yaoji and Mu Lai, I still have something to deal with. I won't accompany you for dinner tonight. I'll come to see you tomorrow." Then he turned and walked out. Behind him, Mu Lai said respectfully, "Father, take care." After sending Mu Yang away, the well-behaved Mu Lai looked up at Yaoji, who was sitting by the window, and frowned. "Don't tell me you still like this man. He's far worse than Commander Qin." Yaoji was stunned. She patted his head and said, "You're just a kid. What do you know about liking or not?" Mu Yang curled his lips and frowned. He showed a mocking expression and said, "Of course I know. He obviously has a wife, but he still shows deep affection for you. But when his wife and mother bully you, he can't help. He only knows how to curry favor with them afterwards. He can't even control his wife and protect the person he likes. If he's not a good-for-nothing, what is he?" Yaoji looked at him in surprise and said, "Are you really only 7 years old?" Mu Yang rolled his eyes and said, "I'm already 11 years old. Don't you know? He just didn't grow tall because he practiced martial arts too early. But the doctor had said that he would start to grow crazily when he was 14 or 15 years old. It wouldn't affect his height when he grew up." Yaoji was speechless. 11 years old was still a kid. Looking at the kid who was staring at her with a serious face, Yaoji smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. I know what to do and what not to do. Prince Ding and Princess Consort gave me a new lease of life. I won't ruin their plans." Mu Lai nodded with satisfaction and said, "That's more like it. Don't worry, I'll make sure you go back to see your son safely." Yaoji couldn't help but smile and said, "Thank you very much." Mu Lai snorted and turned his face away uncomfortably. Yaoji looked back out the window with a faint smile on her lips. She and Mu Yang had cut off all ties as early as when she took her child and fled the Chu capital. In the future, they would just serve different masters. Mu Yang's actions were indeed fast. She didn't know how Marquis Mu Yang persuaded the Liu family and Prince Li's people. 3 days later, Mu Yang took 200,000 men and provisions and set off for Zijing Pass. Before he left, Mu Yang turned back and saw Yaoji holding Mu Lai's hand and watching him leave. Looking at the faint smile on Yaoji's lips, Mu Yang's heart suddenly skipped a beat for some reason. A faint uneasiness spread in his heart. When he looked again, he couldn't see Yaoji's face clearly. He only saw her standing in his direction, and Mu Lai even raised his small hand and waved at him. Mu Yang shook his head and smiled faintly in his heart. He was thinking too much when he was about to go to war. A few days later, a group of men and horses escorted a carriage into the capital. The carriage stopped at the busiest inn in the capital. The neatly arranged guards of nearly 30 people couldn't help but raise their eyebrows. The curtain of the carriage was lifted and a white-clothed figure came out and landed lightly on the ground. The passers-by couldn't help but gasp in surprise. It was the end of the first month. It wasn't even the beginning of spring in the Chu capital. It was so cold that people couldn't help but shiver. This man was dressed in a white silk robe. He looked confident and elegant, as if he couldn't feel the cold at all. But the most eye-catching thing was his long silver hair. There was only one person in the world with silver hair and such elegance. The people who were secretly guessing only felt their hearts pounding. It was just that Prince Ding was disfigured in his early years and didn't go out. Not many people in the capital knew what he looked like. Therefore, suspicion could only remain suspicion. After the man got out of the carriage, he turned around and stretched out his hand. The person who came out was a beautiful woman wearing an autumn-colored cloak with white fox edges. The woman was no more than 20 years old. Her bearing and demeanor couldn't be compared to the ladies of the big families in the capital. Just looking at her from afar gave people a feeling of elegance and magnanimity. Before the people had time to marvel at this pair of beauties, another small head popped out of the carriage. A 5 or 6-year-old boy wearing a black brocade robe came out of the carriage. His collar and sleeves were inlaid with white fox edges, which contrasted with the black brocade robe. The child's white and tender little face was even more adorable and moving. The little boy gave the woman an innocent and cute smile. Even the people watching from afar couldn't help but feel their hearts itch. They wished that this cute and obedient child was their own. Seeing Mo Xiaobao reaching out his little hand to ask for a hug, Mo Xiaoyao stopped Yi Li's hand from reaching out and lightly said, "Be careful not to catch a cold." He reached out and hugged Mo Xiaobao tightly in his arms. That action definitely couldn't be called gentle. Mo Xiaobao uncomfortably twisted his body and received a pat from Mo Xiaoyao on the butt. Mo Xiaobao obediently laid in Mo Xiaoyao's arms. Father was the most annoying. It was not comfortable to hug him. Yi Li gave a faint smile and said, "How can it be that cold?" Although her internal strength wasn't as strong as Mo Xiaoyao's and she didn't need to wear too many clothes in the winter, Yi Li believed that she was more resistant to the cold than normal people. Moreover, it wasn't that cold in the northwest, so the capital couldn't be colder than the northwest. With such a large entourage outside, the innkeeper naturally came out to welcome them. With a glance, he could tell that this group of guests were rich and noble. Although he was curious about Mo Xiaoyao's white hair, he still politely led them into the inn. He didn't dare to ask the guests to register at the counter. The innkeeper said as he walked, "Young master and madam, this way please. This small inn has 2 high-quality courtyards. I wonder if young master and madam will be staying in the small courtyard or..." In this kind of first-class inn, other than the heaven, earth, and mortal rooms, there was a separate courtyard that was even better than the heaven rooms. The price was naturally more than 10 times more expensive than the heaven rooms. There were maids and servants inside. Mo Xiaoyao lightly said, "I want both courtyards." The innkeeper was overjoyed and his smile became even more eager. He quickly said, "Yes, yes, yes. Young master and madam, this way please. I wonder what young master's surname is so this one can register for young master." Mo Xiaoyao stopped and looked at him lightly. Mo Xiaoyao. Young master Mo, that's a good surname. Mo. Ah. The innkeeper who was about to say a few more words with a wide smile suddenly realized that Mo Xiaoyao's name was quite unique. As a result, he slipped and fell to the ground. He raised his head to look at the tall white-haired man in front of him and cried out, "Your Highness Prince Ding." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "That's I." Chapter 577. In the end, the innkeeper forced himself to lead Mo Xiaoyao and the others into the guest courtyard. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he fell to the ground. His legs were weak and he couldn't get up. If it was in the past, being able to receive Prince Ding's family was naturally his supreme honor. But now, when he thought of the relationship between Prince Ding and the imperial family, he couldn't help but tremble. He didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse. But looking at the 2 indifferent guards guarding the courtyard door, the innkeeper didn't have the guts to inform them. His heart trembled, but he still got up from the ground and went back to the front with a sad face. In the end, Mo Xiaoyao and the others appeared at the entrance of the inn and were seen by so many people passing by. In less than half a day, the news that Prince Ding had returned to the capital and was staying at the most luxurious inn in the capital had spread throughout the capital. Naturally, it also spread to the mansions of the nobles and the imperial palace. As for how many people were sad and happy, and how many people were so scared that they dropped the things in their hands, outsiders didn't know. Just as everyone was panicking and having their own thoughts, in the elegant courtyard behind the inn, Leng Haoyu was complaining to Mo Xiaoyao with a bitter face, "Prince, even if you want to return to the capital, you don't have to be so high profile. Even if you want to be high profile, you don't have to stay at the inn. It's inconvenient for us to go in and out. He was different from Fong San, who openly showed that he was from the Prince Ding mansion. Even if he didn't get along with his family, he was still the second young master of the Ling family. He was just a businessman who had some friendship with Prince Ding because of his relationship with Fong San. In addition, second Madame Lang and Princess Ding were close friends before they were married. Even so, there was no reason for them to visit Prince Ding as soon as he returned to the capital. So poor second young Master Lang, who was already over 30 years old, still had to bring his wife and daughter over the wall. Yi Li and Murong Ting sat on the side. Hearing Lang Haoyu's complaints, they couldn't help but look at each other and smile. Although they hadn't seen each other for several years, their feelings for each other hadn't changed at all. The two of them sat on the side and chatted softly while watching the two children playing at the side. Lang Haoyu and Murong Ting's son was 2 years younger than little treasure Mo and was named Lang Junhan. The 3-year-old child looked very similar to Lang Haoyu. At such a young age, one could tell that he was somewhat handsome. However, compared to Mo Xiaobao's mischievous personality, Lang Junhan was more like an obedient and soft little bun. The little bun Lang Junhan seemed to hit it off with Xiaobao Mo. She ran around behind Xiaobao without hesitation, calling him brother. She was so well behaved. However, this kind of affinity was clearly one-sided. Xiaobao's eyes grew on the top of his head. Looking at this little bun who was hugged by his mother the moment they met, he was extremely displeased. He glared at her with his big round eyes, but Lang Junhan took it as a sign of intimacy. Brother, let's play together. Lang Junhan grew up alone and didn't have many friends to play with. Therefore, she was naturally very happy to see this very good-looking brother. Mo Xiaobao rolled his eyes. Who would want to play with a silly little fool? He was even more stupid than his second uncle Su Jirue. This prince won't play with a little kid who doesn't know anything. Mo Xiaobao. Yi Li gave him a warning look. Mo Xiaobao was most afraid of his mother being angry, so he could only hold out his hand for Lang Junhan to hold and said proudly, "Okay, this prince reluctantly agrees to play with you. Brother Xiaobao is the best. Play with Junhan." Lang Junhan held Mo Xiaobao's hand happily. The word brother Xiaobao immediately made Mo Xiaobao's face darken. He reached out a hand and pinched Lang Junhan's little cheek. This prince is called Mo Yuchen. I reluctantly agree to you calling me brother Yuchen. Lang Junhan was at a loss. A 3-year-old child hadn't reached the point where he could understand whether the name was pleasant or not. It was obviously brother Xiaobao. Brother Xiaobao, Lang Haoyu on the side couldn't stand Mo Xiaobao bullying his son. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Oh, Prince Xiaobao, please take care of my Junhan." Mo Xiaobao's white and tender face suddenly turned red. He pointed at Lang Haoyu tremblingly for a while, then he stomped his feet and let go of Lang Junhan and ran away in tears. Lang Junhan, who was left behind, felt wronged. "Brother Xiaobao, don't call me Xiaobao." Mo Xiaobao's roar came from afar. Unfortunately, Lang Junhan, who was busy chasing after brother Xiaobao, didn't hear it. "Brother Xiaobao, wait for me." Seeing Lang Junhan chasing after Mo Xiaobao with her short legs, Murong Ting hurriedly called the nanny to follow and asked worriedly, "Is the little prince okay?" Yi Li understood her son's temperament and said with a smile, "Let him be. He'll be fine after a while." Lang Haoyu waved his folding fan and asked knowingly, "What's wrong with the little prince?" "I just called him Prince Xiaobao. He shouldn't have such a big reaction, right? He should be used to being called that in Glass City." Yi Li said with a smile, "It's nothing. He probably thinks that everyone in the world knows that his nickname is Mo Xiaobao. He found a place to hide and be sad. Hearing this, Murongting finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. She really couldn't understand why Prince Ding and Lili, who looked like very proper and cultured people, would give their son such a funny name and even publicize it to everyone. If it was the child of an ordinary family, it would be fine. But Mo Xiaobao was the heir of the Prince Ding mansion. Yili was also very helpless. Who told Mo Xiaobao to have such a bad life and to have such an unscrupulous father? What does Prince think about the war between the Chu state and the north? Leng Haoyu looked at Mo Xiaoyao and asked seriously. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes and said indifferently, "This is a matter between the Chu state and the north. What does I think have to do with it?" Leng Haoyu hesitated for a moment and asked, "Prince means that our Prince Ding mansion won't interfere in this matter." Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, "The imperial family won't give us a chance to interfere in this matter. If you're worried about your father, then you should make plans as soon as possible. The Prince Ding mansion won't be of much help. If we interfere, it will only harm him." Leng Haoyu smiled bitterly and said indifferently, "What plans can I make? He has never thought of me, this good-for-nothing son of his, in his eyes. At most, I can only do my best to protect his life." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. "Later, I'll have Qin Feng transfer 2 people to you. I'm afraid that Chu Jing won't be safe in the future. When the matter here is over, you should return to Glass City." Leng Haoyu's answer satisfied Mo Xiaoyao. As a superior, he naturally didn't like his subordinates to be so ruthless. After all, Leng Huai didn't care about Leng Haoyu, but he didn't have any enmity with him and was still his father. But at the same time, he didn't want Leng Haoyu to ruin his plans for Leng Huai. Leng Haoyu's face lit up with joy. "Thank you, Prince." If he asked Qin Feng to transfer people, the one who would be transferred to him was naturally the elite of the elites, Qi Lin. With Qi Lin secretly protecting his father, even if his father was defeated in the future, Leng Haoyu was confident that he could bring his father back alive. Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and asked with a frown, "How is Mo Jingqi now?" After Mo Jingli moved here, he actually didn't rush to ascend the throne. This isn't like his usual style. When he mentioned Mo Jingqi, Leng Haoyu didn't have a good impression of him. He didn't even want to pity him. Mo Jingqi won't die for a while. Mo Jingli probably wants to torture him. But Mo Jingli also has something on me. I'm in Mo Jingqi's hands, so in the end, we can only take a step back and let noble consort Lu's son be the crown prince.